Chapter 1006. Special Invincible Realm. This sentence was not difficult to understand in the Dark World, and it was even easier for the 3 half-step Invincible Realm experts of the Joint Forces. Before Phoenix, the King of Shadow in the Dark World, Wuxia, who made the Sanctuary suffer the heaviest loss in nearly 100 years, was a special Invincible Realm expert. He regarded the so-called 4 realms of martial arts as nothing. Experts who broke through to the Invincible Realm from a single realm were all special. Strictly speaking, the combat capability of such people might not be absolutely strong, but their exploration and excavation of a certain realm were constantly beyond the limit. Their knowledge and understanding of their own realm even surpassed that of experts at the peak of the Invincible Realm. Therefore, such people could often burst out incredible destructive power in a battle. The sky was full of wind and snow, and it was a world of ice and snow. White frost fluttered in the city center, filling up the sky and wreaking havoc in the city. Everywhere was covered in a cold silvery white color. The elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuxia Palace kept retreating, and the formation was scattered. Finally, it turned into a large-scale escape. As Phoenix moved forward, more and more people fell down, and more people ran away. Obviously, this was a special person who broke through to the Invincible Realm from the Ice-Condensing Realm. No. Janamalas frowned. She can't be regarded as a real Invincible Realm expert. Janamalas affirmed his speculation in a very certain tone. Instead of relaxing, his tone became more and more serious. She can be said to have the combat capability of the Invincible Realm. The key is the current temperature and environment. This environment can be said to be the home field of all ice-condensing realm experts. Now, even a real Invincible Realm expert may not be her opponent. Retreat? Without any hesitation, Saber Ghost said. Can we leave? Sword Soul's voice was extremely gloomy. We can leave, but what about the people below? What about the people outside? Give the order. All retreat, get out of Lioli City, back to the Queen City, and even back to Kanglan City. Janamalas said slowly. We must be clear that our people in Lioli City are no match for the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing at all. We are just the vanguard. Our goal is to attract the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing to enter, weaken the guard power of Mount Dibbing, and cause the greatest damage to Beihai before they appear. At present, I think we have done a very good job. But our target is not Lioli City, the Sword Soul said coldly. North Sea has gone mad. They stopped us here at all costs, and they've also suffered great losses. We didn't enter the battlefield we expected, but we've caused more damage to the enemy than we expected. Isn't that enough? Janamalas laughed. We should retreat. What else can we do? Fighting North Sea to the death with just a few of us here is equivalent to throwing our lives away. Remember who you are. We are just the vanguard. Some masters of the Joint Forces will follow His Majesty and the Royal Highnesses to set foot on Mount Dibbing, but these people are few. Most of them will stay in Kanglan to stabilize the situation there. We have a great advantage in Kanglan. Temporarily retreat to Kanglan, concentrate our forces, and eliminate all the high-end combat forces in North Sea. This is one of the most crucial plans in the final battle. Janamalas clenched his fists and shook his head. In the final battle of North Sea, the most important thing is not only Mount Dibbing, but also in Kanglan. We will concentrate our forces to kill all the high-end combat forces in North Sea, and then directly fight from Kanglan to Mount Dibbing to join the Royal Highnesses, making the Wang family of Beihai completely history. He looked at the Sword Soul and said word by word. In order to achieve this goal, some insignificant sacrifices are completely acceptable. Insignificant sacrifices. The Sword Soul stared at the conqueror of the Jiang family of South America with red eyes. Her palm pointed out of the window. This is an insignificant sacrifice. They knew very well how many people there were in the so-called vanguard, and they also knew how many of their people were in Lioli City at this time. In the face of the entrance of the high-end combat force of North Sea, if they ordered a retreat at this time, in such a situation, in a panic and without a command, it would be good if only 1/10 of these people could return to Kanglan City. This kind of sacrifice was hard to bear for Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuxia Palace, and for the entire East Island. They are indeed great. Saber Ghost said blandly. But compared to the goal we have been pursuing for hundreds of years, they are insignificant. Not only them. As long as we can achieve the goal, we even the two highnesses, including Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. Everyone is insignificant. We will remember them. If we can't leave here tonight, someone will remember us. The sword soul gritted her teeth and kept taking deep breaths. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end, she said nothing. In this final battle of North Sea, it was Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, but it was not only them. In the few months before the final battle broke out, the strength of the two martial arts forces in East Island could be said to have skyrocketed. In just a few months, their comprehensive strength, including combatants, weapons and equipment, and economic power, suddenly increased by dozens of times. This kind of investment meant that they couldn't afford to lose. And it meant that the forces behind them couldn't afford to lose either. The more than 70,000 square kilometers of fertile land in the south of North Sea was the obsession that took root in the hearts of all of them for hundreds of years. This kind of obsession was passed down from generation to generation. Now that there was a chance, they had to seize it. They could lose, they could sacrifice, and they could even give up everything. But they just couldn't lose. Because they really couldn't afford to lose. If this final battle of North Sea ended with their failure, it could be said to be an unprecedented disaster for Jifeng Sword Raining School, for Wuji Palace, and for the entire East Island. This was not even a problem of shaking the foundation. If they didn't see the result they wanted in this big gamble, it would be a problem whether they could linger on in the future. Let's go. Janamalas narrowed his eyes and looked at the wind and snow outside the window. The wind and snow were howling. At the same time he made up his mind. Phoenix below raised her head and glanced at the conqueror at the same time. Through the night, through the wind and snow, they were dozens of meters apart. Crack! In the extremely clear cracking sound, all the windows of the municipal building, which was more than 10 stories high, suddenly shattered. The cold wind and snow instantly blew into the building. All the warmth completely disappeared. In the temporary command room, the temperature dropped by dozens of degrees the moment the windows were broken. Bang! All the teacups, bottles, cans and kettles in the command room froze at the same time and then exploded. The temperature kept dropping. An endless icy wind blew in. The conqueror of the Jiang family of South America, the deputy palace master of Wuji Palace, the deputy suzerain of Jifeng Sword Raining School. There were also 6 other superiors of the thunder-shocking realm. Everyone trembled slightly in the cold wind. Not because of fear or scruples. Just because of the cold. It was an almost instinctive physiological reaction. Phoenix stepped in the air, and her body was getting higher and higher. There seemed to be an invisible staircase in the air, dragging her up constantly. The wind and snow were dancing wildly in the sky. Every snowflake seemed to become an extremely sharp sword. The fluttering snowflakes fell in her domain, and flew out with her power. Phoenix's domain was getting bigger and bigger, squeezing the sky above Lioli City. Thunder was still roaring and spreading in all directions, but no electric arc could get close to the wind and snow in the air. It was winter in North Sea, the lowest temperature in the early morning. Everyone was facing the wind and snow that had been roaring and raging in North Sea for several days. What was the home advantage? To Phoenix, all of this was a true home ground advantage. She was not the top expert of the half-step invincible realm. Strictly speaking, she was in the ice-condensing realm, which was infinitely close to the invincible realm. All the combat capability she possessed was constantly breaking the limit in the domain of the ice-condensing realm. So this home advantage allowed her to break through her bottleneck easily and temporarily in this environment. At this moment, in this wind and snow, it could be said that Phoenix was at the peak of her life. Endless snowflakes gathered crazily around her and neatly arranged themselves. Phoenix's figure was getting higher and higher, gradually approaching the command room in the building. The snowflakes all over the sky surrounded her, forming a vast white disk. In the command room, 9 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm and above had gathered together. Countless blue electric arcs flashed around them. Everyone gathered together and slowly retreated. Slowly retreated. The boundless cold wind and snow seemed to freeze everything, and even their movements became extremely difficult. Phoenix's tall figure came up from the ground. Through the broken window, she was level with the 9 superiors in the command room. The boundless snow disk almost completely swallowed her figure. Vaguely, Janamalas the Conqueror saw Phoenix open her hands. He opened his mouth to say something, but the rapidly dropping temperature and the cold wind poured directly into his throat the moment he opened his mouth. His face turned red, and he trembled and coughed wildly. Boom! The moment the first cough sounded, Phoenix's hands were completely open, embracing the night, embracing the wind and snow, destroying heaven and earth. The densely packed disc-shaped snowflakes around her suddenly exploded. The once bustling city seemed to usher in a huge avalanche without warning. The wind and snow were as sharp as knives. The flying snow seemed to have become a part of Phoenix's body. They flew everywhere, tearing everything around them. Streets, people, buildings, trees, gardens, street lamps. The wind and snow were mighty. The violent sound was earth-shattering. It seemed that the whole world was collapsing. The temperature dropped crazily. The flying wind and snow froze everything. This was Phoenix's strongest blow using the home advantage. She directly blew up her domain, exploring the power of the invincible realm with the ice-condensing realm. Her domain had the most distinctive feature of the ice-condensing realm. That was absolute coldness. The temperature dropped crazily, and in the shortest time, it reached a horrifying low temperature of nearly 100 degrees below zero. Under the snow explosion, all the elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace were completely buried by the collapsed snowflakes and buildings. Under such conditions, almost no so-called elites could survive. The snowflakes gradually fell to the ground. The extreme coldness was still spreading silently in the ruins. Phoenix stood in the air, slightly lowered her head, and narrowed her eyes. In her sight, the blue electric arcs collapsed countless snow and large pieces of ice, and one figure after another appeared in front of her. It was still the 9 superiors with high-level combat capability. With the 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm as the core, everyone joined hands to block Phoenix's outbreak. In addition to Phoenix, in the nearby large area, these 9 superiors were the last survivors of the snow explosion. Phoenix's face was indifferent, without sadness or joy. She had never liked Beihai, so she was not moved by the so-called miserable situation in front of her. She came to Beihai only because of her sister's request, that was all. The enemy in front of her was not dead, so she could kill him again. Even if she couldn't kill him, it didn't matter. Just try your best. Endless snow and wind surged toward her body again. Phoenix's eyes seemed to turn into snow, pure white, extremely pure and focused. Bitch, how dare you? A seemingly mad shout suddenly came from below. A thunder-shocking realm expert of Jifeng Sword Raining School was so angry that he was about to rush out and fight with Phoenix. The snow explosion caused by Phoenix just now buried all the elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, including all his direct subordinates. Under the attack of extreme anger, he seemed to have completely lost his mind. A dazzling thunderbolt suddenly bloomed in his hand, and then went out in an instant. It was a world of ice and snow, endless coldness. Phoenix glanced at him. Puff. In the dull sound, the bodies of the 3 thundershocking realm experts who had not yet reached the peak of the thundershocking realm suddenly exploded, but there was no splashing blood. All the blood in the 3 people's bodies was completely frozen into ice cubes, and the broken bodies completely became frozen meat, falling to the ground piece by piece. Retreat. Retreat now. The 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm felt their scalps go numb. They didn't know enough about Phoenix, but under such unique conditions, the extreme strength that Phoenix exerted was not at the invincible realm, but close to the peak of the invincible realm. This kind of special superior who only pursued a single realm, once he grew up, was enough to make anyone feel tricky. The 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm, and the 3 superiors of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm turned around at the same time. Expressionless, Phoenix crooked her finger at them. The wind and snow between heaven and earth froze in an instant. The bodies of the 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm suddenly stiffened for a moment, and they almost fell into the snow. Blood gushed out of their mouths, and instantly froze into ice. Their speed of escape suddenly slowed down countless times. The bodies of the three superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm behind them were completely frozen where they were. As Phoenix moved her finger, all the blood in their bodies rushed out of their eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouths. The blood left their bodies and froze instantly, falling to the ground. All the blood in the three superiors at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was sucked out in an instant, and their bodies completely shriveled at a speed visible to the naked eye. Phoenix's figure slowly floated forward in the wind and snow for a while. She finally opened her mouth and said the first words since she stepped into the battlefield. "You can't run away." Facing the three superiors of the half-step invincible realm, she slowly moved her palm forward. The wind and snow in all directions were like dragons, roaring and rising into the sky, filling the night sky. Phoenix's palm slowly pressed forward. But nothing happened. The roar of the helicopter came from far away in the sky. From south to north, it flew over the sky of Lioli City. Countless wind and snow froze in the air in an instant. An extremely obscure domain directly shrouded from the inside of the helicopter, instantly controlling the wind and snow in Phoenix's hand. Endless heavy snow swirled, squeezed together, and directly smashed toward Phoenix. Phoenix's expression changed slightly. Before her body could react, the endless snowflakes had already slammed into her body. Bang! In the dull sound, Phoenix's body was directly slapped away for dozens of meters, and a large amount of blood flowed down from all over her body. This power, Conqueror, Saber Ghost, and Sword Soul were ecstatic. They subconsciously bowed in the direction of the helicopter and said loudly, "Thank you, Your Majesty." The helicopter did not stop at all, and did not even care about Phoenix's life or death. It flew over Lioli City at full speed. On the helicopter, several superiors of the Invincible Realm, and more than a dozen superiors of the half-step Invincible Realm were silent all the way. When the high-end combat capability of Mount Dibbing entered the battlefield to fight back against Kanglin's sect, the strongest combat capability of the joint forces also left Kanglin's sect. They went straight to Mount Dibbing. Chapter 1007. Even when most of the high-end combat power had left Shenzhou, the defense of Mount Dibbing could still be described as terrifying. This was the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai, which had been developed for hundreds of years. In the past hundreds of years, it seemed that since the establishment of the Wang family of Beihai, no one had been able to reach the foot of Mount Dibbing. This behemoth, which had always stood at the peak of the dark world, had always blocked all the battles outside Beihai. Naturally, no one could really see the fangs of Mount Dibbing. Now Chen Fangqing had crossed the bottom line. Under the pressure of internal strength and external pressure, Mount Dibbing had completely become an indestructible war fortress. Li Tianlan had heard from Li Honghe a long time ago that the old man had evaluated Mount Dibbing as the safest place in the world. Although the old man had not explicitly said some weapons and facilities, he had bluntly said that there was a very powerful firepower configuration on Mount Dibbing. The most important thing was that these firepower configurations were updated and fine-tuned almost every year. Today, this was the first time that Li Tianlan had seen such a complete Mount Dibbing. More than 2 years ago, when he swept across Beihai, Mount Dibbing was quiet. At about the same time, when the peerless expert who left a private plane and suddenly disappeared split Mount Dibbing with a sword, perhaps the sword was too fast, so Mount Dibbing was still quiet. Until today, until tonight, until now. Li Tianlan had thoroughly seen the true face of Mount Dibbing. On and under the mountain, 7 sets of automatic weapon systems, 12 sets of semi-automatic weapon systems, 9 lines of defense, more than 2,000 weapon terminals, 2 sets of alternating scanning systems, hundreds of monitoring radars, a military low-altitude satellite. The dense firepower with no blind spots could guarantee to cover every corner of Mount Dibbing at any time. This so-called every corner even included the Emperor Palace, where the patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai lived. There were no blind spots, so there were no weaknesses. When all the weapons of Mount Dibbing were fully activated, with sufficient ammunition, it was an indestructible fortress that could even withstand the frontal attack of hundreds of thousands of troops. This war fortress could no longer be described as terrifying. Its unimaginably powerful firepower had reached a crazy level. Even as strong as Li Tianlan was, he felt suffocated when he saw this. In this state, once Mount Dibbing opened fire, Li Tianlan was not sure how long he could hold on. With Ruthless, he could ensure that he could retreat. But what if Ruthless ran out of energy? Floating alone in the air, Li Tianlan squinted and looked down at the clear Mount Dibbing. Vaguely, he seemed to understand the meaning of the Wang family of Beihai. He was standing there. Mount Dibbing showed all the defense systems, not only to deal with the enemy, but also to deter allies. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and looked down at Wang Shengxiao. The people in the sky were looking down on the ground. The people on the ground were looking at the sky. Beside Wang Shengxiao, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses kept saying something. His voice was not loud, but his clear and steady voice directly reached Li Tianlan's ears. Patriarch, we have completed the final inspection of all the weapon systems. The ammunition is sufficient, the system is stable, and the weapons are in good condition. We can officially put them to use at any time. Have you checked the personnel? Wang Shengxiao nodded and asked slowly. Don't worry, everyone's loyalty is guaranteed. The middle-aged man adjusted his glasses and smiled. If you don't trust me, you can give the control authority to others. We will obey all the arrangements of Mount Dibbing. My assistant can also cooperate with all your orders. Uncle, you're being too serious. Wang Shengxiao laughed. He stretched out his hand and patted the middle-aged man on the shoulder. His voice was sincere. I have enough trust in you, uncle. My father once told me that maybe one day, the whole world will betray the Wang family of Beihai. But even in a real desperate situation, there are people we can trust. You are one of them. The middle-aged man smiled. He was a little relieved, a little emotional, and a little sad. Tianzong. He shook his head and let out a long sigh. Wu Qinggu, a senior researcher and honorary president of the Zhongzhou Academy of Military Sciences, the president of the Beihai Academy of Military Sciences, and the chief weapon researcher of Mount Dibbing. This was a name that might not be known by others, but it was definitely well known in certain fields. In the past 2 decades, in the entire Zhongzhou state, in the field of weapon development, only Dongqing Wujin of the Dongqing clan could be compared with Wu Qinggu in various honors, achievements, and academic status. Wu Qinggu was from Wuyue in Zhongzhou state. 15 years ago, in order to invite him to Beihai, Wang Tianzong, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, made 3 visits to the thatched cottage before he finally succeeded. Compared with Dongqing Wujin, who focused on individual combat unit equipment and heavy armor, he might be a little worse than Dongqing Wujin in these 2 fields, but his professional ability was extremely good. Several weapon systems on Mount Dibbing, various armaments in the Beihai Corps, and countless large weapons on the sea, land, and air were shining with the sparks of his wisdom. Beihai had a deep foundation, but in the past 2 decades, their military power had been at the top of the world. It could be said that Wu Qingwu's contribution was indispensable. In the entire Mount Dibbing, Wu Qingwu was the only person who could make Wang Tianzong call him Brother Wu. He was one of Wang Tianzong's best friends. As far as Wu Qingwu was concerned, Wang Tianzong was his only friend. His loyalty and position did not need to be emphasized at all. As Wang Tianzong said, even if the world betrayed the Wang family of Beihai, Wu Qingwu was definitely one of the few people who stood by the Wang family of Beihai. He shook his head and took out a cigarette from his pocket. Before he could light it, his fingers suddenly moved. The sword energy moved slightly. The cigarette in his hand rushed into the sky and fell into Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan flicked his fingers, lit the cigarette, and took a deep breath. Wu Qingwu froze for a while, coughed, took out another cigarette and lit it. His voice was clearer than before. It's okay. Even if Tianzong is not here, Mount Dibbing is still Mount Dibbing. Anyone who dares to attack here will pay a heavy price. Wang Shengxiao nodded and said yes. Wu Qingwu looked up at Li Tianlan. There was some fear and dissatisfaction in his eyes. After this incident, all the weapon systems in Mount Dibbing will be greatly adjusted, so that His Majesty standing in the sky will not think that he knows Mount Dibbing like the back of his hand. He will sweep it again when he is in a bad mood. Li Tianlan stood in the sky, smoking and looking down at Wu Qingwu. Wu Qingwu stared back at him without flinching. It's okay. Wang Shengxiao shook his head and said with a smile, Our development model is almost the same as that of Emperor Dong's palace, and we also have the same development ideas and development paths. This means that we will never be allies who share life and death with each other, but it also means that we will not become sworn enemies. Wu Qinggu snorted and took a deep breath of the cigarette. He said in a muffled voice, "I hope so." Li Tianlan did not speak. After coming to Mount Dibing and talking with Wang Shengxiao for a while, he left the stage of formidable person and stood in the air, refusing to communicate with anyone. He was silent as if he did not exist. Wu Qinggu threw the cigarette in his hand to the ground, shook his head to shake off the snowflakes on his head, and said slowly, "Patriarch, do you have anything else to say?" "No," Wang Shengxiao said with an easygoing smile. "Uncle, I am very relieved. Then I will go to prepare." Wu Qinggu nodded and turned to leave. Most of the high-end combat force on Mount Dibing had left Xingzhou to fight back against Kanglin. In an unprecedented state of weakness, although they had Li Tianlan now, Wu Qinggu, who could easily control all the weapons on Mount Dibing, was the most important figure in this battle before Li Tianlan took action. He would enter the underground base of Mount Dibing, and then enter a sealed space of about dozens of square meters, controlling all the weapons on Mount Dibing to crush everything. In that small space he was absolutely safe. But it also meant that as long as he entered that sealed space, no matter he fired at the joint forces or Wang Shengxiao, no one could do anything to him. Under such circumstances, Wang Shengxiao gave Wu Qinggu the highest level of trust. His cell phone rang. Wang Shengxiao took out his phone and glanced at the message on the screen. He narrowed his eyes. He took one last look at Wu Qinggu's back. In a flash he walked to the air and stood beside Li Tianlan. "They are coming." With a gloomy expression, Wang Shengxiao said slowly. The wind and snow were drifting between heaven and earth. Li Tianlan looked down at his watch. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. The night was long in winter. At this moment, there were about 2 hours before dawn. It's almost time for them to take action. Li Tianlan nodded, not surprised. "Where are they?" 20 minutes ago, they passed by Liuli City and saved 3 experts of the half-step invincible realm from my aunt. The 3 people did not return to Kanglin. Instead, they followed the joint forces to Mount Dibing. They delayed in Liuli City for some time, and now they are close to the floating island. Wang Shengxiao said blandly. The 3 experts of the half-step invincible realm have to be followed. Their high-end power seems to be just SOSO. Li Tianlan shook his head. Is Kanglin sure to get them back? It's very difficult. Wang Shengxiao said calmly. There is no specific information at present, but the most important thing is that they have too many people. Our victory or defeat here is directly related to whether we can get Kanglin back. Before there is a specific result here, the best result for Kanglin is a stalemate. Now our people have arrived at Queen City. The next step is to cross the river and fight. Li Tianlan fell silent and did not speak. His eyes fell on Wu Qinggu, who had gradually walked far away. "You trust him a lot?" Li Tianlan suddenly said. "Of course." Wang Shengxiao nodded without hesitation. "In the current situation, Uncle Wu is one of the people I trust most." He suddenly frowned. "Do you suspect him?" "No." Li Tianlan shook his head and said blandly. "But in this case, many examples show one thing. The more trustworthy a person is, the more likely he is to betray." "You think too much." Wang Shengxiao couldn't help laughing. Li Tianlan didn't say much, just gave a faint hum. Chapter 1008. Wang Shengxiao didn't talk much about this topic. Wu Qingwu's loyalty and position were issues that the people of Beihai didn't need to consider. In his extremely sensitive position, if he didn't have enough loyalty, Mount Dibing would have been riddled with holes over the years. For so many years, Mount Dibing had always been impregnable, which could fully prove Wu Qingwu's loyalty. In the wind and snow, Wang Shengxiao reached out and caught a snowflake falling from the sky. In the deep cold night, his tone was a little strange. "You fought with Jiang Shangyu a few hours ago. Do you think his defense can withstand the firepower on Mount Dibing?" Li Tianlan glanced at him. Wang Shengxiao's expression was a little complicated. It was a feeling that was hard to specify. Jiang Shangyu. This name caused more waves in the dark world tonight than the outbreak of the final battle in Beihai. Most of the time of his battle with Li Tianlan was in the dark domain. Emperor Dong's palace was not obliged to publicize Jiang Shangyu's identity, but when Jiang Shangyu came to Beihai from Tiannan, the figure that had been shrouded in starlight and clouds showed its true face for the first time. There was no disguise at all. There was no need for any disguise. Jiang Shangyu. He surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, and was a domain-type master who stood at the highest point in the dark world for hundreds of years. His Majesty, who had been hiding in the dark. The three identities brought a huge impact to the dark world. Everyone couldn't come back to their senses. As for Wang Xingxiao, the impact gradually turned into a strong bitterness and unwillingness after the initial shock. In the past 2 years, it was the time when the Wang family of Beihai needed strength the most. In particular, the lack of high-end combat capability made countless forces in the dark world restless. Wang Xingxiao had worked very hard. Under great pressure, he was making progress almost every day. A 27-year-old half-step invincible realm expert was extremely rare, not to mention now, even in the past decades or hundreds of years. But when he worked hard, Li Tianlan had become Donghuang. He was the chosen one, and could be regarded as an exception. Then Jiang Shangyu also became His Majesty, who surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. What about him? What was he? The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Shengxiao's mentality had indeed been severely affected, but the rapid outbreak of the decisive battle in North Sea had successfully diverted his attention. But this did not mean that he could forget this matter. At this time, when this name was mentioned again, Wang Shengxiao's heart was really a little complicated. It couldn't be said to be jealousy or envy. All sorts of emotions were suppressed in his heart, and in the end, it turned into a faint but piercing unwillingness. I don't know. Li Tianlan said faintly. Most of the weapons on Mount Dibing are secret weapons developed by the Wang family of Beihai in recent years. Without specific firepower parameters and examples, how can I answer you? What if it's you? Wang Shengxiao frowned and said. If it's more powerful than conventional weapons, then it's meaningless. Li Tianlan said calmly. I may not be able to withstand the firepower on Mount Dibing, but if you are on the mountain and you and I are your enemy, it is not difficult for me to kill you and escape. It's impossible for Jiang Shangyu to come here without knowing the defense on Mount Dibing. But I don't think he will be so stupid as to use his body to resist the firepower on Mount Dibing when facing me. So in this respect, he put his hope on East Island? Wang Shengxiao laughed. He looked at Li Tianlan deeply and said softly, there seems to be some problems in East Island. This was undoubtedly the weirdest problem since the final battle. The elites of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Limitless Palace who were fighting each other didn't know, because in their consciousness, all the communication was perfectly normal. Every ordinary elite, from squad leader to squadron leader to commander, every communication was very smooth. Every communication was very normal, and every order seemed to be logical. Beihai didn't know what was going on, but the most realistic situation was that all the fleets of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuxia Palace had left Beihai and entered Liaodong, Zhongzhou State. The Black Dragon Army of the Border Control Corps sent by Dongqing Wudi had taken over the ownership of the fleet an hour ago, because the staff in the fleet either surrendered on the spot or were killed directly. The greatest firepower advantage of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuxia Palace had been completely ruined. But the most shocking thing was that the elites of the joint forces acted as if they didn't know what had happened. The whole world was dumbfounded and didn't know what was going on. Some intelligence systems of Beihai were in full operation. All kinds of intelligence showed that from a few hours ago to now, countless communications were trying to get in touch with East Island, including Chen Fangqing's encrypted phone. But all the communications were blocked. Phone, internet, satellite, everything. The whole East Island seemed to be completely out of touch with the whole world. Mount Dibing's extremely powerful defense system wasn't exposed, but it wasn't a secret. Just like Li Tianlan said, Jiang Shangyu wouldn't be stupid enough to use his body and domain to resist the artillery fire when facing Li Tianlan. So his only hope was East Island. Even if Chen Fangqing was crazy, he wouldn't let his own force attack Beihai. East Island was the only candidate to suppress the firepower of Mount Dibing for a short time. But now East Island was out of touch. All the elites of the joint forces were going to face Mount Dibbing, which had no high-end combat capability, but could cover the sky and the earth in terms of firepower. What was the surprise? Wang Shengxiao suddenly had some expectations. When they show up here, I really want to see their faces. Wang Shengxiao smiled leisurely. Jiang Shangyu is not a fool. Li Tianlan said blandly. He might not know that East Island had a problem before, but I didn't hide anything when I passed by Kanglin. Even if he couldn't see it, when he passed by Floating Island in Shenzhou, he would feel that something was wrong. But he still dared to come, which is enough to explain the problem. Wang Shengxiao frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. What do you think the problem is? Li Tianlan continued to ask. Wang Shengxiao was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, I don't know. There are two possibilities. Li Tianlan thought of the conversation with Qin Weibai and Xianyuan Wushang, who suddenly joined Emperor Dong's palace. He narrowed his eyes. The other party temporarily controlled all the communication networks of East Island. The word temporarily was the key. First, Jiang Shangyu has got in touch with East Island, and the authority to communicate and control weapons has been restored in East Island. At least, he and East Island both think that before he comes to Mount Dibbing, the abnormality inside East Island can return to normal. Second, Li Tianlan looked at him and said, there are loopholes in the defense system of Mount Dibbing, and they are loopholes that you have all ignored. That's impossible. Wang Shengxiao shook his head. Don't jump to conclusions. Li Tianlan said blandly. Today, it's not only Jiang Shangyu's joint forces who want to destroy Mount Dibbing, but also your second uncle. Do you think he knows something? Chapter 1009. When the helicopter flew over Shenzhou, the brightly lit floating island city had become very quiet. The lights were shining, and the traffic was surging. The helicopter flew at a low altitude. Every major traffic road in Shenzhou was guarded by the elites of the Beihai Corps. The atmosphere might be more tense than usual, but in general, everything in Shenzhou still belonged to Beihai. People's lives in Shenzhou didn't seem to be affected at all. Seeing this scene, no matter how good Jiang Shangyu's self-restraint was, his face became a little gloomy at this time. They set off from Kanglin City and passed by Queen City and Liuli City. What they saw in front of them could barely be regarded as the expected scene. Chaos was spreading, flames were burning, people were panicking, smoke was rising everywhere, order was collapsing, and it was a mess. This was the scene he expected, and it was also the scene in line with the plan. But when they passed by Liuli City and arrived at the floating island, everything suddenly changed. Liuli City had been stabilized. The Beihai Corps had begun to restore order. The combatants were withdrawing from the war zone. All departments of Beihai were cleaning the scene. Order in all aspects of the floating island was being restored. Then they arrived at Shenzhou. Shenzhou was just a place with more patrols of the Beihai Corps. Shenzhou was a place with lights, singing and dancing. It was as if nothing had happened. Looking at this scene, Jiang Shangyu couldn't even be sure if there had been chaos in Shenzhou before. He squinted, and he became a little annoyed. He still lost contact with East Island, and he couldn't get any information. It seemed that everything had been out of control. What was certain was that East Island's firepower still hadn't recovered. This operation was very important for Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace. With this opportunity, East Island completely bet on the future, without leaving any leeway. But as soon as they sat at the table, all their trump cards were revealed, and the funny thing was that they didn't know it. In the original plan, Zhongzhou State had Chen Fangqing's cooperation, and all the firepower of East Island would be unreservedly fired. If nothing went wrong, the scene in Queen City should be the scene in Shenzhou now. Now there was no strong firepower support. Not to mention what it meant, at least, the Beihai Corps of Shenzhou had the possibility to support Mount Dibbing. Uneasiness was brewing in his heart. Jiang Shangyu actually had some thoughts in his heart, but he couldn't say them and didn't want to say them. This was indeed the best opportunity. For the Wang family of Beihai and Li Tianlan, there was indeed an indelible hatred in his heart. Along with hatred, there was also ambition. Right now, everything was indeed the best opportunity. Because of Chen Fangqing, Wang Xiaoyao, and Wang Qinglei, the Wang family of Beihai, which used to be strong and indestructible, had a very deep crack. If he didn't seize this opportunity, Jiang Shangyu was not sure if he could turn the tables in the future. This was indeed the best opportunity, but it was also the least successful operation. This was not the first time he had thought of leaving early in this kind of situation. As long as there was no danger to his life, then this operation could not be considered a failure. But in the end, it was just a thought. He could not say it out loud, nor could he do it. Yagyu Kurumi was now his disciple. He was cooperating with Jifeng Sword Training School, Wuji Palace, Li Kuangtu, the Sanctuary, and the Jiang family of South America. This was the first large-scale operation since the formation of the United Forces. The rudiment of the dynasty had been built. Jiang Shangyu couldn't let it go, and he didn't dare to let it go. He could lose the battle with Li Tianlan, but he couldn't retreat at this time. If he retreated at this time, not only would he break with Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace, but it would also leave a foundation of distrust for other partners. At this time, the United Forces and many second-class forces from the Dark World came to watch. If Jiang Shangyu retreated at this time, it was almost equivalent to becoming the enemy of the entire Dark World. In this way, even if he could survive when the final battle ended, Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai would. How could they let go of this opportunity? At that time, the Jiang family would be even more miserable than the Jiang family in his memory. We will arrive at Mount Dibing in 15 minutes. Thinking silently, Jiang Shangyu said with a poker face, "Everyone, is there anything else you want to say?" In the cabin, Moraid subconsciously looked at his watch. It was 5:30 in the morning in Beihai, which was full of wind and snow. The night was still dark, as if it could swallow everything. East Island's professionalism in network security is really impressive. In the corner, Wang Xiaoyao glanced at Yagyu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji, and his voice was cold. "Are you sure it's our problem?" Yagyu Kurumi didn't speak, but Tianhai Wuji looked straight into Wang Xiaoyao's eyes with sharp eyes. "Otherwise? Isn't the situation in front of you already explained everything? There is no way to restore communication after such a long time, and even the control authority of weapons has been lost. No matter who wins or loses in this final battle, you will become the laughingstock of the world. If you didn't drag us down, the current situation would be 10,000 times better." Wang Xiaoyao taunted mercilessly. He, Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace were indeed allies at this time. But this cooperation plan didn't mean that Wang Xiaoyao would like it. Once Mount Dibing was completely destroyed, Wang Xiaoyao would become the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. As a condition, half of the territory of the 3 cities in the south of Beihai would return to East Island. Wang Xiaoyao certainly didn't want to see this happen, but it was not unacceptable. His position determined his head. So once he became the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, the cooperation at this time was equivalent to automatically ending. After Wang Xiaoyao got the position he wanted, he would desperately take back nearly half of the land that East Island had taken. At that time, the two sides would change from allies to enemies. Everyone knew this, so there was no need to be polite at this time. But no matter what happened in the future, specifically tonight, the two sides had the same goal. What East Island did in the trial with the Allied forces was really shocking. When they set off from Kanglan province, no one took it seriously. Everyone thought that East Island would soon restore communication and take back the control authority of weapons. But until now, when they were about to arrive at Mount Dibing, they still lost contact with East Island. Shengzhou and Liuli were already calm. But East Island still didn't know anything? What the hell were they doing? Even if someone used virtual intelligence to replace communication, it couldn't be flawless. Did those people really not notice anything? Wang Xiaorao took a serious look at Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurasumi. At the beginning, he even thought that East Island was going to play a trick in this final battle, but now it turned out that East Island was really King Noob. Were their technicians all stupid pigs? Enough, Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. It's meaningless to say this now. We have come to this point, and we have no way back. Move forward and trample Mount Dibing, or we will be crushed by Mount Dibing. That's our only choice now. But we don't have strong firepower support now. Jiang Guochu's tone was a little complicated. In terms of personal force, They were undoubtedly the few people who stood at the peak level in the dark world. But the peak of personal force didn't mean that they were omnipotent. When countless modern weapons exceeded a certain scale, even the peak of personal force couldn't withstand a moment of concentrated fire. It was not an exaggeration to say that they lost half of their strength when they lost contact with East Island. Jiang Guochu had been a little uneasy, and he even wanted to leave in advance more than once. But the Jiang family of South America had paid too much for this final battle. If he left at this time, not only would he lose everything, but he would also lose contact with Jiang Shangyu. Then the previous plan of destroying the allied forces of Beihai and helping him control America would naturally be ruined. Among the several invincible realm experts, his mind was undoubtedly the most indecisive. Wang Xiaoyao clearly wanted the position of patriarch. At this time, he had no other choice but to stand with the allied forces. No matter what, he had to move forward. Otherwise, he would end up with nothing. Not to mention the two from East Island. If they left at this time, they would end up worse than Wang Xiaoyao. As for Moraid, he was completely a loyal dog beside Jiang Shangyu. He didn't have so many messy thoughts at all. In addition, there was Li Guangtu, who was not on the plane now. No one knew where he was. Even Jiang Shangyu didn't know where he was. Accidents are always out of control. Jiang Shangyu shook his head and looked at Wang Xiaorao. What do you want to add? Wang Xiaoyao glanced at Tianhai Wuji, who had been looking at him, shook his head slightly, and said lightly, nothing. Everyone froze for a moment. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and tentatively said, Mount Dibing. Nothing. Wang Xiaoyao repeated the sentence again. Jiang Shangyu laughed. This is really a surprise. Surprises are all mutual. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was calm. They can surprise us, so I can also surprise them. What was the surprise? What? It was King amazing. Surprise. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was very soft, but with his voice, everyone's eyes lit up. Jiang Shangyu looked ahead. In the night, the sky was full of wind and snow, and the outline of Mount Dibing was looming. Ha! Jiang Shangyu let out a long breath and said with great pride, Today we will. Whoosh! Before his voice died away, the wind and snow all over the sky suddenly froze. In the distance ahead, the sharp sword light that seemed to tear everything suddenly shone in the night sky, stabbing directly at the helicopter where Jiang Shangyu was. Jiang Shangyu raised his eyebrows and instantly released his domain. The condensed domain completely blocked the sword light. The helicopter moved forward slowly. In reality, another helicopter appeared in the distance. One was from south to north, and the other was from north to south. At the moment when they were facing each other, the sword light surged like a tide. The door of the opposite helicopter opened. A woman who looked extremely stiff slowly walked out of the cabin. Her body paused in the air for a moment. In an instant, the woman's aura began to soar wildly. In the blink of an eye, she broke through the invincible realm, and the powerful aura became more and more terrifying. The woman's long hair fluttered in the wind and snow. She stood in the air. In the sky and on the ground, there was sword light everywhere. Moraid, who was the closest to the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world, immediately became extremely serious. Everyone recognized this woman. This woman should have appeared in Mount Dibing, but at this time, she passed by Mount Dibing and appeared here to stop several invincible realm experts. The Queen of Darkness, Flaming Fire, the Master of Samsara Palace, Moon-Gazing Song. Vaguely, Mount Dibing in the distance was shaking slowly. A few kilometers away from Mount Dibing, Moon-Gazing Song stood in the air, and the sword light was mighty. Your Majesty, you go to Mount Dibing, and I will solve the incantation. Moraid slowly opened his mouth, and his voice was extremely dry. Everyone could hear the guilt in his tone. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. He was about to face Li Tianlan, and even Li Guangtu. It was really inappropriate for him to take action at this time. He had to ensure that he was always in his peak state to face the strongest enemy. But Moraid, he looked at Moon-Gazing Song and shook his head subconsciously. Let me do it. A calm voice suddenly rang out, calm and indifferent. Wang Xiaoyao stood up from his seat and looked calm. You go to Mount Dibing and leave her to me. Everyone subconsciously raised their heads and looked at Wang Xiaoyao. Jiang Shangyu turned around and stared deeply at Wang Xiaoyao's face. After a while he opened his mouth and laughed. Ha! He shook his head hard and whispered, "The Wang family of Beihai." Chapter 10:10. There was no sound in the cabin. The roaring sound of the helicopter rotors was completely isolated by the domain, so Jiang Shangyu's sigh seemed particularly deep and long. Wang Xiaoyao didn't respond clearly. He just looked at Jiang Shangyu and suddenly said with a smile, "Don't you trust me?" Several Invincible Realm experts hadn't come to their senses yet. When they heard this, their hearts subconsciously tightened. Whether they could trust Wang Xiaoyao or not was a very serious question. Because of the seriousness, they secretly tested him many times from different angles, and they got the results they wanted and let go of their doubts. But this situation was too sensitive. Mount Dibing was more than a mountain. It was the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai, the nest of Beihai, and their ultimate goal. When they lost contact with East Island, and had no strong firepower support, it was understandable that they would encounter any degree of firepower suppression in Mount Dibing. Wang Xiaoyao stayed here to face Meng Xiang'a, which meant that Wang Xiaoyao was out of the final battlefield of the final battle. If this was a trap, Wang Xiaoyao, the person who set up the trap, would remove himself at the last and most critical moment, and they would bear all the dangers alone. If this was really a trap, it would take more than 2 years. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, it could totally create a trap that could completely destroy them. Believe it or not. You can doubt me, Wang Xiaoyao said slowly. His whole aura was changing little by little, from the original calm and indifference to a kind of indomitable sharpness and aggressiveness. The premise is that you can stop this woman. Outside the cabin, Meng Xiang'a's aura was getting more and more terrifying. From the initial stiffness, she became flexible and strong. Her state seemed to have completely recovered to the peak in the shortest time. The violent sword energy spread out layer by layer with her body as the center, and the space was distorted visibly. The fluttering snowflakes were directly torn into pieces by the sword energy the moment they got close to her. This kind of kendo was fierce and crazy, as if it deliberately and easily tore everything in the world, including the sky and the earth. This was the 24 moves of Sword of the Li family. This was Meng Xiang'a, who had really put most of her body into the domain of the peak of the Invincible Realm. It was a choice that was not surprising at all. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and looked at the figure in the distant sky. Qin Weibai was the real Gu Xianyan who accompanied Dongqing Huangtu. As Qin Weibai's most trusted confidant, Mun Jiyu and Song naturally followed the path that Dongqing Huangtu had taken. She might not have the absolutely perfect sword intent, nor could she see the so-called end of martial arts, but she was absolutely no stranger to the 24 moves of sword. For hundreds of years, the Li family's sword was the sharpest and craziest sword in the dark world. A super powerful opponent who was infinitely close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, and had a deep understanding of the 24 moves of sword. The corner of Jiang Shangyu's mouth twitched. He was sure that Moraid was no match for Mochizuki-song. Apart from him, perhaps no one present was a match for Mochizuki-song. On the surface, Wang Xiaoyao, who entered the Invincible Realm 2 years ago, was undoubtedly very good at hiding his strength. According to Jiang Shangyu's speculation, Wang Xiaoyao now even had the strength close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. His realm might be a little lower than that of Wang Yuexiang'a, but the Wang family of Beihai was best at the extreme outbreak. His saber might really be able to stop the Li family's sword. Even if he couldn't stop it, it would be more reliable for him to stop Mochizuki-song than Moraid. Wang Xiaoyao was the best choice. If Moraid and Wang Xiaoyao didn't go, who else could go? Jiang Guochu, Yagyu Kurasumi, or Tian Hai Wuji, who was also close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. No matter who went, in the face of Mochizuki-song in this state, they might die directly. They couldn't expect Li Kuangtu to jump out and face this woman now. In the somewhat awkward and depressing silence, the helicopter in the air was directly bound by the domain and stopped in the air. The situation was obvious. No one was a match for Mochizuki-song. Let Wang Xiaoyao go. If this was a trap, all of them might die when they entered Mount Dibing. If Wang Xiaoyao didn't go, any of them would also die if they went to face Mochizuki-song. So no one would choose to die. So if Wang Xiaoyao went, they would have doubts in their hearts. But if Wang Xiaorao didn't go, they couldn't get around Mochizuki-song. This became a deadlock. Maybe we can do it directly. All of us join hands and go to Mount Dibbing at the same time after killing her? Moraid moved his lips and suddenly said. A gaze directly swept over. Then a second gaze. A third gaze. Everyone's eyes were focused on Moraid's face. Moraid was a little embarrassed. He felt that there was something wrong with what he said, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong for a while. Jiang Shangyu rubbed his forehead and sighed. What makes you think that after we join hands to kill Mochizuki-song, we still have the possibility to go to Mount Dibbing to fight? Moraid was stunned. Jiang Guochu looked at him, as if he was looking at an idiot. He pointed to the direction of Mount Dibbing and said in a low voice, "We are now less than 10 kilometers away from Mount Dibbing. That is to say, now we are in the perception range of Li Tianlan and the attack range of his sword energy. If all of us join hands to fight Mochizuki-song, believe it or not, Xian Yuanfeng's sword energy will arrive before you get close to her. Even if Li Tianlan doesn't take action, do you think Wang Shengxiao is a fool? Can't he just open fire? If everyone takes action at the same time, it means that the battlefield is limited to here. Do you still want to go to Mount Dibbing? If it's as you say, why aren't they firing now? Isn't it better to limit the battlefield here?" Moraid was embarrassed into anger. Jiang Guochu was stunned. Jiang Shangyu was also stunned. This was indeed a problem. Along with this question was an extremely clear memory. After Dong Qinghuangtu died, he seemed to have walked all the way from Beihai to Shenzhou with ruthless ancient immortal face, and finally set foot on Mount Dibbing. That battle also ended on the North Sea behind Mount Dibbing. He ran to at that time they were close to Mount Dibbing, but the other side still did not move. What was on Mount Dibbing? Jiang Shangyu frowned and had a thought of leaving again. He even considered whether it was better to limit the battlefield to the foot of Mount Dibbing. But Li Tianlan was in Mount Dibbing now. If they besieged Moongaze and Moongaze here, Li Tianlan must be the first to arrive. Their sword intent and sword chi came from the same source. In such a situation, with Mount Dibbing watching them covetously, they were not sure about Li Guangtu's current situation. Jiang Shangyu frowned and finally made up his mind. He turned around and looked at Wang Xiaoyao. His voice was calm and steady. "In that case, please." Still the same sentence. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was flat. "I have full sincerity about this cooperation." "Of course." Jiang Shangyu smiled. "I've always believed you." Wang Xiaoyao said no more. He reached out and slowly picked up the giant blade beside him. The 2-meter-long blade had an extremely brutal arc, and the bright blade shone with cold light in the cabin. Wang Xiaoyao gently stroked the blade, his movements extremely focused and gentle. The helicopter continued to move forward in Jiang Shangyu's domain, and the distance between it and Moongaze was quickly shortened. "Can you win?" Tianhai Wuji suddenly said. His eyes were a little hot. In the past countless eras, the Wang family of Beihai was almost the first family of swordsmanship in the dark world. But in the so-called first family of swordsmanship, there was Wang Xiaoyao, an anomaly who used a saber. Tianhai Wuji thought of himself. He was also born in Jifeng Sword Training School, the first force of swordsmanship in East Island, but he eventually left there and founded Wuji Palace, which used sabers. Saber and sword. This was the first battle of the invincible realm in the final battle of Beihai. Looking at this scene, Tianhai Wuji suddenly had a very strong desire to win. This had nothing to do with the overall situation. It was only about martial arts, but it was extremely important. Wang Xiaoyao smiled and narrowed his eyes at him. "We all have our reasons not to lose." He lifted the huge blade in his hand and opened the hatch. Above the sky, the fierce wind and snow poured into the cabin. Wang Xiaoyao, holding the saber in one hand, took a step forward. His body stepped on the air and stopped in mid-air. Moongaze and Moongaze were less than 100 meters away from him. The helicopter did not stop. It quickly passed the two and rushed directly to Mount Dibbing. Moongaze and Moongaze were expressionless and motionless. But the monstrous sword energy was boiling around her in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao, who was calm and composed, held the hilt with both hands. The blade was raised. The night full of wind and snow suddenly lit up for a moment. The pale and gloomy saber light broke the night sky, and the violent edge instantly jumped into the cabin. Several Invincible Realm experts in the cabin looked back at the same time. In their sight, under the flying snow, in front of Mount Dibbing, the bright saber light suddenly rose into the sky full of sword energy. It moved forward with indomitable will. Chapter 10-11. The sword energy spread out layer by layer from the top of Mount Dibbing. Li Tianlan stood quietly in the air, mercilessly draped over him. The long hem and wide sleeves of his robe fluttered gently in the flying snow. Countless golden patterns and the sword energy were perfectly integrated, covering the entire Mount Dibbing and shuttling in all directions. At his level of martial arts, it could be said that all aspects had completely exceeded the limits that the human body could reach. Within the range of tens of thousands of meters where the sword energy spread, every blade of grass and every move of everyone were extremely clear and obvious in Li Tianlan's perception and sight. He saw the helicopter flying over from Mount Dibbing. He also saw the helicopter flying over from Shenzhou. He saw flaming fire walking out of the cabin with the sword energy all over the sky. He also saw Wang Xiaoyao coming out of the cabin. The helicopter of the joint forces approached quickly. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless. He just looked in the direction of Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire was the first supermaster of Samsara Palace he met after entering the secular world. When he and Qin Weibai first met, Flaming Fire was Qin Weibai's driver. Li Tianlan's understanding of her was mostly superficial. He knew that she was absolutely loyal to Samsara Palace, that she was an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and that she was Qin Weibai's most trusted person. This was Li Tianlan's previous understanding of Flaming Fire. After the glorious end of Mormon's eternal sword, Flaming Fire directly left the Samsara Palace, which only existed in name, and did not even meet Li Tianlan. It was not until he was in the desert prison that he knew that Flaming Fire was the strongest supermaster in the Samsara Palace, and could even be said to be the shadow of the master of Samsara Palace, a supermaster of the Invincible Realm. Li Tianlan did not feel anything when he heard the news. Perhaps the improvement of his strength had changed his mentality, and he was less in awe of the Invincible Realm. So when he heard the news, although he was surprised, he did not think much about it. Tonight, after more than 2 years, this was the first time he saw Flaming Fire. Flaming Fire was cold. Li Tianlan knew this very well. But in the few times they got along in the past, although Flaming Fire was quiet and cold, Li Tianlan could still feel her respect for him from her words and deeds. Whether it was because of Qin Weibai or for other reasons, there was nothing wrong with her attitude towards him. But when Flaming Fire's helicopter flew over Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan clearly felt the gaze in the helicopter. That gaze passed through the cabin and landed on him, carrying with it an extremely complicated emotion. There was no respect. It was anger, resentment, grievance, unwillingness, and repression. Countless emotions gathered together. Li Tianlan could feel Flaming Fire's dissatisfaction with him, but he didn't know why. The helicopter flew over. There was no communication between the two. He watched as Flaming Fire blocked the way of the joint forces with the sword energy all over the sky. Countless sword chis and sword lights bloomed in his perception, and they were extremely detailed. It was so familiar. Déjà vu. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan was really sure of something, but at the same time, he had a lot of doubts. He remembered the challenge that the master of Samsara Palace had made before the final battle in Heaven Capital that shocked the Dark World. He challenged Gu Xingyun. At that time, in the Sky Academy of Huiding, the one who fought with Gu Xingyun should be Flaming Fire in front of him. In the chaos of Snow Country, it was also Flaming Fire who had warned Li Guangtu in Wulan State, and even lent him the sword energy temporarily. At that time, Li Tianlan vaguely felt that the other party's swordsmanship was familiar. The other party's sword energy was like his own sword energy, and the intensity of the sword energy did not seem to be as strong as that of the master of Samsara Palace in the legend. So at that time, he also saw Flaming Fire. Thinking back carefully, the few times he had seen the master of Samsara Palace in the past seemed to be Flaming Fire. The only thing Li Tianlan could be sure of was that on the outskirts of Mormons, before he saw the eternal sword with his own eyes, the master of Samsara Palace he saw was the master of Samsara Palace herself. The fiercest quarrel between the two broke out at that time. She called him a bastard. He called her a bitch. That bitch who gave everything, even her life, to me? It was as if a string in his mind had suddenly snapped. The strong heartbeat kept vibrating in his chest. It was his heartbeat, but it didn't seem like his heartbeat. Not knowing how far away, there seemed to be another heart beating in sync with his heart, faster and faster. On that day in Mormons, the last request the master of Samsara Palace made to him was to hold her. And the last thing she said to him was that she was sorry. In the small city in the far north, when he held her, she pierced his body with the blade in her hand. The cold blade almost passed through his heart. It was bone-chilling, heart-piercing, and heart-wrenching. For that era, that stroke was like the beginning of the end of that era. But for Li Tianlan personally, that stroke was the end of the chaos in Snow Country. After that stroke, when he woke up from his coma, the chaos in Snow Country was over. The sunshine of the new era bathed him. There was no shadow, and he was free, until today. All the memories seemed to become a little vague. But at this moment, when he saw flaming fire, those vaguely suppressed memories suddenly flooded out like a tide. He stood there quietly, but what he thought of was what Mormons had said to him in Fonting Pavilion before the blade pierced his chest, as well as those words. Do you know it? In the hands of the country, the murderous weapon is a national treasure. In the hands of the superpowers, it is also the last trump card. Everyone knows that Blue Sky Underworld belongs to the Samsara Palace, but in fact, this murderous weapon is now yours. When the Samsara Palace got the Cloud Silk Robe, she personally fought for it, even when she was seriously injured. The Samsara Palace lost countless elites, and the two affiliated wealthy families were wiped out. After that, the Samsara Palace lost countless favors in order to make the Cloud Silk Robe into clothes. Now, that dress is also yours. Everything that the Samsara Palace has done and all the resources in the future are also yours. You're a bastard, but did you call her a bitch? Yes, she's bitch enough. She gave you everything. Isn't that a bitch? Am I right? You don't need to apologize, and I don't ask you for anything. It's just there are some things that are too late to regret. The extremely familiar sword energy and sword light bloomed in front of him, and in his perception, there was no successor. He Jingzhao's memory, which he once thought was naturally forgotten, suddenly flooded again. His heart beat faster and faster. The calm hypnosis seemed to break through the shackles under the scouring of time. The blade seemed to pierce through his chest again. The heart-wrenching pain turned into confusion. Everything in the past began to become clear. I don't talk to bastards. In his memory, she seemed to be gritting her teeth. In the black cloak, Li Tianlan had never seen her expression and eyes clearly. You don't talk to bitches either. Okay, then let me go. I won't. Let me go. You bitch. I won't let you go. Li Tianlan, you bastard. Bitch, let me go. I won't. Let me go. I won't let you go. Come and kill me. Her words, deeds, and every move kept echoing in his mind. Some deliberately suppressed memories and doubts began to become clearer and clearer. It seemed that until now, he had not figured out why the master of Samsara Palace had helped him at all costs. It seemed that until now, he had not figured out who the master of Samsara Palace was. These doubts were sealed away in an extremely deliberate and natural manner. The shackles began to loosen little by little in the sword light in his sight. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered that if the master of Samsara Palace he saw most of the time was flaming fire, then who was the real master of Samsara Palace who helped him at all costs but died in Mormons in the end? Heh! Li Tianlan suddenly made a sound. The sharp pain in his heart seemed to be suffocating. He tried to take a deep breath and tightly pursed the corners of his mouth. What's wrong with you? Wang Shengshao was a little confused. He was keenly aware that something was wrong with Li Tianlan. To be exact, the moment the sword light of flaming fire lit up, Li Tianlan became a little bit wrong. Nothing, it's just... Li Tianlan looked at the sword light in the distance absent-mindedly. He shook his head and finally said nothing. The helicopter in his sight began to accelerate. It passed flaming fire and Wang Xiaoyao. The sword light shone in the night with the wind and snow. The night was lit up. In an instant, the shining sword light was completely suppressed, and there was only the dazzling and domineering saber light left in the sky and on the earth. Li Tianlan suddenly narrowed his eyes, and he seemed to wake up in an instant. The crazy and domineering saber light filled the world. The moment the light lit up, the solid sword energy around Wang Yuexianga had been completely shattered by the saber light. There was no communication, no confrontation. The moment Wang Xiaoyao walked out of the cabin, he directly attacked with the saber. The 2-meter-long saber blade swept across the night sky, cutting the wind and snow. There was a harsh buzz everywhere between heaven and earth. The saber blade swept through the air, vibrating countless times at a very subtle frequency in an instant. The violent and almost irrational saber light was like a monstrous wave, surging and sweeping everything. In an instant, the figure of Wang Yuexianga was completely shrouded in it. The light leaped over the night sky, unscrupulous. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao completely changed, from his eyes to his temperament. It was a complete change. The saber light bloomed around him layer by layer. Wang Xiaoyao held the long saber in his hand tightly, and his every move became extremely arrogant and domineering. The invasion was like fire. The saber light that tore through the night rushed wildly. Wang Xiaoyao went straight forward. His body moved in the air, as if he were walking on the ground. He walked, ran, and rushed. The saber light and sword energy filled the world and kept whistling around him. In the blink of an eye, Wang Xiaoyao, who was running wildly, was covered with blood. The sword energy tore his clothes and cut wounds on his body one after another. Blood flowed out, but Wang Xiaoyao didn't seem to feel it at all. He rushed forward. More and more saber light bloomed with his body as the center. More and more violent. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes lit up, flashing, as fast as the wind. His figure directly crossed a distance of tens of meters in the instant of a step, and appeared in front of Wang Yuexianga. The huge and daunting long saber was held tightly by him, and raised above his head. Downward chop. Under the snowy night, there seemed to be a dazzling lightning in the shining saber and sword. Clang! A clear and violent crash spread far in the air. Flaming fire raised her hand. A long sword that looked extremely slender was held tightly in her hand. The extremely hard and sharp blade was raised above her head and blocked Wang Xiaoyao's downward chop. The shining sword light and saber light disappeared in an instant. A circle of transparent shock waves visible to the naked eye distorted the nearby air and spread wildly under the night sky. The force of the first collision between the two directly penetrated the ground from the air. The forest within 100 meters nearby completely collapsed, the ground cracked, and the road was in a mess. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouths at the same time. Everyone was watching the first collision between the two. Li Tianlan's eyes were dazed for a moment again. He recognized the sword in Flaming Fire's hand. Its code name was Cicada Cry. This was the sword of the master of Samsara Palace. In terms of material, craftsmanship, and history, Cicada Cry was not as good as Listen to the Sea of the Wang family of Beihai, Autumn Water, which once belonged to Summer Solstice but was now held by Huangfu Qiushui, and the famous saber Millennium in Wang Xiaoyao's hand at this time. However, Cicada Cry, which was fused with more than a dozen special alloys and forged with special techniques, was also close to the peak of cold weapons. Li Tianlan looked at the sword in silence, his eyes deep and serene. The helicopter sprinted forward. Feeling the saber light behind him, Jiang Shangyu suddenly fell silent. "Your Majesty?" Moraid, who was watching the battle behind him, turned around immediately and looked at Jiang Shangyu. His tone was a little confused. At this moment, he clearly felt the change of Jiang Shangyu's aura. "It's okay." Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled and stopped looking back. He said calmly, "Let's fly straight over." The helicopter moved forward at full speed. It was less than a kilometer away from Mount Dibing. The lights on the mountain, the palace, and the neatly arranged crowd could be clearly seen. Wang Shengxiao and Li Tianlan stood in the air and watched the helicopter getting closer and closer. "I heard that the welcome ceremony you received when you just landed in Beihai was a little special?" Wang Shengxiao narrowed his eyes and laughed softly. His smile was full of cruelty. Li Tianlan was expressionless and did not speak. Autumn Water's welcome ceremony was full of gunfire and did not stop. The welcome ceremony of Autumn Water, which was full of gunfire and did not stop, was indeed very special. What a coincidence. Wang Shengxiao continued. I also have a very special welcome ceremony for them. The helicopter flew over. 600 meters. Wang Shengxiao raised his palm with a cold expression. 500 meters. 400 meters. 300 meters. In the helicopter, under everyone's nervous gaze, Wang Shengxiao's smile suddenly became extremely cruel. His palm fell hard. It was quiet over Mount Dibbing. Everything was calm. Nothing happened. What was it? Oh, damn it. Nothing happened. There was no gunfire. Nothing at all. There was nothing at all. Wang Shengxiao's smile suddenly froze on his face. At that moment, his expression suddenly became extremely subtle. It was not panic or anger, but with a touch of absent-minded astonishment. 200 meters. The helicopter flew over. All the weapon systems of Mount Dibbing remained silent. Mount Dibbing suddenly became extremely quiet. Wang Shengxiao's body shook. He remembered the back of Wu Qinggu, who now controlled all the weapon systems of Mount Dibbing, when he left. Wu Qinggu. Wu Qinggu. How could it be? Wang Shengxiao froze in the air, and did not even breathe for a while. How can there be absolute loyalty? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said in a flat voice, 100 meters. The helicopter paused for a moment, following which, nearly 20 figures jumped out of the cabin. Jiang Shangyu was at the forefront. Several Invincible Realm experts were slightly behind. Behind them were more than a dozen of the most powerful experts of the half-step Invincible Realm in the joint forces. Everyone rushed directly to the top of the mountain the moment they landed. A vast domain expanded wildly at the foot of the mountain, pushing all the way up. In the extremely quiet and strange atmosphere, the experts of the joint forces still remained cautious, which could be seen from their landing at the foot of the mountain. Wang Shengxiao finally came to his senses. His body trembled slightly. He did not breathe a long sigh of relief until Jiang Shangyu and others began to sprint toward the top of the mountain. Are you very angry? Li Tianlan asked. No. Wang Shengxiao shook his head, and his eyes were sad. I just feel very disappointed. Wu Qinggu, the chief person in charge of all the weapon systems of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong's best friend. Wang Shengxiao almost became his godfather when he was a child. At the most critical time of Mount Dibbing, he betrayed Mount Dibbing. What was this? Even if it really happened now, Wang Shengxiao could not come to his senses. Can you catch him? Li Tianlan asked. Wang Shengxiao shook his head with a bitter smile. The main control room of Mount Dibbing has an extremely exaggerated defense system. Because it needs to control all the weapon systems, the safety of the operator must be guaranteed. This can also ensure that no matter what happens, he will not be threatened by the outside world. Even for me, it will take some time to open the door of the main control room. There is a secret passage in the main control room that can directly lead to the underground shelter. There is a special subway line in the shelter, which can directly leave Mount Dibbing. If Wu Qinggu wants to betray us, he must have changed the activation code of the weapon system. When we enter the main control room and crack the code, the final battle may be over for a long time. Li Tianlan shook his head and said nothing. How ironic it is. Wang Shengxiao laughed self-mockingly. We in East Island both put our biggest hope on the strongest firepower coverage. But in the end, East Island lost its weapon control authority. We were laughing at them just now, but in the next moment, we also lost our authority. From this point of view, it's fair. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. I have a good uncle. Wang Shengxiao laughed with some mockery. He looked at Li Tianlan with sincere eyes. We really put a lot of hope on the weapon system, but this is not all. Your existence is the biggest trump card to ensure the outcome of Mount Dibbing. So, he looked at Li Tianlan seriously. In this situation, what else do I need to pay? Li Tianlan was silent for a while. It was really not good for him to take action now. He was not afraid of Jiang Shangyu or Li Guangtu. But if the two of them joined forces and seized the opportunity, no matter how confident Li Tianlan was, he would be fatally threatened. Without the artillery support of Mount Dibbing, his situation was undoubtedly more difficult. So Wang Shengxiao took the initiative to increase the price and asked him what he wanted. Li Tianlan shook his head gently. He had nothing that needed to rely on Mount Dibbing to get. He had already got the most important thing. Because from this moment on, the Wang family of Beihai, which had stood at the peak of the dark world for hundreds of years and had never fallen, had officially and completely lost their invincible overlord status. This era belonged to him. Wang Shengxiao would get a relatively complete Mount Dibbing, the position of patriarch, and the victory of the final battle. Losing this era and this world was the price that Wang Shengxiao paid. But what about himself? He got this world, but what did he lose? The black windbreaker slowly fell off from his body. The sword formation of 13-story buildings slowly expanded around him. One after another, famous swords rotated around Li Tianlan. The sword energy soared into the sky. Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and gently pointed. His fingers fell on one of the swords at random. The startling sword trembled violently, and the sword energy was boiling and whistling. The infinite sword energy completely turned into a substance, outlining the figure of another Li Tianlan in front of Wang Shengxiao. At this moment, it was hard to say whether the startling sword carried Li Tianlan's sword energy, or whether Li Tianlan's sword energy shaped the startling sword. The two merged with each other, natural and incomparably perfect. Li Tianlan looked at the other himself in front of him and nodded. It's him. Chapter 10:12. The saber light and the sword light quickly melted in the fierce collision, and disappeared completely. Saber and sword, all martial arts, were in the final analysis, the purest power. Wang Xiaoyao and Mochizuki swordplay were less than 3 meters away from each other. The saber and the sword collided fiercely, and the powerful destructive force kept colliding in the shortest distance, like a bomb that kept exploding in a very small space. The transparent shock wave spread far away. The bodies of both sides were stretched to the limit in an instant. Their joints trembled, their blood coagulated, and their bodies lost strength for a short time. Their figures froze for a moment in the air. Everything happened in an instant. But in the blink of an eye, the power of the continuous explosion within 3 meters caused great damage to their bodies again and again. Wang Xiaoyao could not avoid the sword of Mochizuki-san. Mochizuki-san could not avoid Wang Xiaoyao's saber either. Blood gushed from the corners of his mouth. The huge power kept vibrating, squeezing his internal organs, and tearing his flesh and blood. The next second, when the saber and the sword collided, there was a dull loud noise between heaven and earth, centered on the place where the two men stood. It was like rolling winter thunder cutting through the sky. The figures of Mochizuki-san and Wang Xiaoyao flew backward at the same time. Blood bloomed in the air. Wang Xiaoyao's figure flew backward for dozens of meters before he slowly stopped. He pressed his chest and took a long breath. Then he narrowed his eyes and looked at Mochizuki-san, who also stopped. Mochizuki-san's eyes were extremely quiet. He had no reaction to Wang Xiaoyao's strength that was beyond everyone's expectations. Get out of the way. Wang Xiaoyao held the saber. The blade was slightly raised in the wind and snow, extremely stable. I don't mind fighting desperately, but I don't want to have a meaningless fight. You are the Dark Queen now. Go back to your European land, and I can pretend that none of this happened. The Wang family of Beihai that I control will not find any trouble with the Dark Knights in the future. Maybe we will have a chance to cooperate in the future. The sword energy around Mochizuki-san fluctuated, and he did not speak. Wang Xiaoyao moved forward slowly, neither arrogant nor rash. Mount Dibbing, which had fallen into a strange silence ahead, finally made a sound. The flames were shining in the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Xiaoyao turned a deaf ear, and just looked at Mochizuki-san. The Samsara Palace no longer exists. I don't know what happened between you and Little Bai. You went to the European continent. Since you made the choice at the beginning, why come back now? His first move was decisive in order to display his strength. He had already proved that he had enough strength. Next, he would undoubtedly want to talk. What are you trying to say? Mochizuki-san said coldly. You don't belong to Emperor Dong's palace or the Wang family of Beihai. I think we can talk. I have never intended to be enemies with the Dark Knights. If possible, I even hope that we can cooperate. Knights Templars now belong to Jiangshangyu. The Holy Land had lost its most important external force. Arceus had died in Snow Country. In a short time, the Holy Land was no longer qualified to threaten others. But if I controlled the Wang family of Beihai, I would inevitably face the counterattack of Rothschild. That kind of super wealthy family with a long history, even if it was not in its heyday, was still a problem. If we cooperate, I hope the Dark Knights can contain Rothschild in the European continent. In return, when I stabilize the situation, I will use the power of the Wang family of Beihai to help you kill Rothschild, and even the Holy Land. At that time, the Dark Knights will become the biggest superpower in the European continent. You will no longer be the Dark Queen of the Dark Knights. You can even become the only queen of the entire European continent. How about that? Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what you want when you left Little Bai? Mochizuki-san was silent for a while and said calmly, I have never left anyone. Wang Xiaorao continued to move forward. The distance between the two of them continued to shrink, and he laughed. So I'm blind? You have been in the European continent for more than 2 years, and have never returned to Tiannan. Why did you fall out with Little Bai? Why don't you continue to follow her? Does she deserve it? Mochizuki-san's voice grew colder. From the beginning to the end, I only followed the palace master, not anyone. Qin Weibai, huh? What is Qin Weibai now? Wang Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes. A sharp killing intent flashed in his eyes almost instinctively. It doesn't matter. Wang Xiaoyao's voice became a little lower and a little indifferent. Anyway, now that your palace master has fallen, do you want to see Li Tianlan off again for the sake of our old friendship? Or is it the will of the master of Samsara Palace? She can't see what you do when you die. What's the point? Mochizuki-san quietly looked at Wang Xiaoyao, who was getting closer and closer. She gently twitched the corner of her mouth and said lightly, What do you know? Oh. Wang Xiaoyao shook his head and said with a smile, I really don't know, but what we are talking about now is what we all know. The Wang family of Beihai can't be anyone's vassal. After tonight, they and I will part ways. I need the power of the Dark Knights. Similarly, with the rise of the joint forces, I think the Dark Knights also need the power of the Wang family of Beihai. You didn't stay in Emperor Dong's palace, so I am your only choice. The wind and snow were flying. The cold wind swept through the air. He stopped less than 20 meters away from Mochizuki-san and stretched out his hands. It was a very sincere but extremely weird action. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao held the knife in his left hand and stretched out his right hand to Mochizuki-san. The knife and his hand were both in front of him. What's your choice? Wang Xiaoyao asked calmly. What qualification does a person who betrayed his own elder brother, and even betrayed his own family for status, have to cooperate with me? There was no expression on Mochizuki-san's face. Her clear and bright eyes were filled with disdain and ridicule. The smile on Wang Xiaoyao's face disappeared. There seemed to be only the sound of the wind between heaven and earth. Mount Dibing, a few kilometers away, was filled with flames. Thunderbolts and flames were surging. The domain and the sword energy crisscrossed. Lights and shadows were flashing in the sky. Standing in front of Mochizuki-san, Wang Xiaoyao suddenly fell silent. There was only the sound of the wind between heaven and earth. This is your evaluation of me? Wang Xiaoyao was silent for a long time before he slowly asked. This is the evaluation of the whole dark world of you. Mochizuki-san's voice was cold. Perhaps Wang Xiaoyao himself had never thought about this question carefully. More than 2 years ago, when he showed the strength of the invincible realm near the summer solstice and left Mount Dibing, his life had been extremely busy. Nominally, he was in charge of Snow Country on behalf of the Wang family of Beihai, but all the high-level officials of Beihai already knew that he had parted ways with Mount Dibing. Wang Xiaoyao was very busy. He was busy sorting out his own army, practicing his martial arts, cooperating with Wang Qinglei to secretly create all kinds of obstacles for Mount Dibing, fighting with Wang Shengxiao for the power of the Wang family of Beihai, cultivating confidence, and contacting with the people of the joint forces. He had a lot of things to do every day. Under such circumstances, he naturally ignored some things. Just like what Mochizuki-san said. The Dark World's evaluation of Wang Xiaoyao was not good. To be precise, it was extremely bad. Wang Tianzong did not have a good reputation in the hearts of the enemies of the Wang family of Beihai. But no matter how they talked about it, One thing was undeniable. Wang Tianzong was indeed a real expert in his heyday. He also had the demeanor and awareness of being an expert. He was an ambitious and domineering man. No matter what, when people mentioned Wang Tianzong, they would always be in awe instead of contempt. Wang Tianzong was indeed vicious to his enemies. But he had always been very kind to his friends and family. For hundreds of years, the patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai had never mistreated any of their allies, including the former Li family. And Wang Xiaoyao had no friends now. Beside him, other than his allies, there were his subordinates, and then there were his enemies. Each and every one of them was an extremely pure circle. To some extent, it was indeed because of Wang Tianzong. Ever since he was a child, he had always been concerned about his biological brother. As the elder brother, Wang Tianzong could be said to be really meticulous. He took care of Wang Xiaoyao everywhere, and took whatever he wanted. The whole dark world knew how good Wang Tianzong was to Wang Xiaoyao. They also knew how many knives, swords, and storms Wang Tianzong had blocked for Wang Xiaoyao. Everyone thought that this was a model of brotherhood in the dark world. Even in the top wealthy families, not every pair of brothers would kill each other. But under such circumstances, as soon as Wang Tianzong fell, Wang Xiaoyao betrayed the Sword Emperor and the Wang family of Beihai. The wild ambition that he had suppressed for a long time was completely exposed. His face was ferocious, which made people despise him and feel disgusted. Winner takes all? If Wang Xiaoyao succeeded, perhaps many years later, the forgetful dark world would also think that Wang Xiaoyao was an expert. But now he was indeed somewhat looked down upon. I have never betrayed Beihai. Wang Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice. Whether you believe it or not, this is what I say. Everything I do is for the land under my feet. After he fell, only I can make Beihai better and better. Why? Why doesn't everyone approve of me? Mochizuki-san did not speak. Everything the other party said had nothing to do with her. Her shame and contempt were just an expression of her attitude. Seeing you, I suddenly think of a lot of things. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes gradually changed, becoming a little painful and a little complicated. In the wind and snow, he laughed self-deprecatingly. When I first saw Little Bai 9 years ago, it was at the charity dinner held by the Huating municipal government. On the surface, she showed that her assets were only Preaching International Group, so the position arranged for her by the organizer was not very prominent. But she sat in the corner, quietly and coldly, and naturally became the focus of the audience. I have never seen such a girl. She is not special or special. It is really a kind of amazing. She is there, in front of me, occupying everything. The self-deprecation on his face became more and more obvious. In the words of the internet, from the first time I saw her, I even thought of the name of our child. At that time, Wang Xiaoyao smiled with some emotion. The sound of the battle in Mount Dibing not far away kept coming. His eyes were a little dazed. Mochizuki-san was motionless. She had been looking for opportunities. But now Wang Xiaoyao did not show any flaws. That night beside me was, well, Zhang Xiaohua, the supervisory minister of Huating. He took me to Little Bai. Oh, I almost forgot that you were also there at that time. He looked at Mochizuki-san. Do you remember what Zhang Xiaohua said to Little Bai? Mochizuki-san was also in a trance for a moment. It seemed that she mentioned her real boss. At this moment, she showed a fatal flaw. But Wang Xiaoyao did not make a move. He stood where he was, waiting for the answer. At the moment when Mochizuki-san was in a trance, she was shocked and her body tensed subconsciously. You don't remember? Wang Xiaoyao asked. Mochizuki-san looked at him coldly and did not speak. Wang Xiaoyao laughed. Him Zhang Xiaohua. When he introduced me, he just said, Boss Qin, this is the younger brother of Wang Tianzong, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, King Xiaoyao of Beihai. He is young and promising. You should get to know each other. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly laughed crazily, and the aura all over his body began to become a little crazy. The younger brother of Wang Tianzong, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, King Xiaoyao of Beihai, young and promising, young and promising. How ridiculous is that? It was just an introduction. Young and promising. More than a month later, When I deliberately appeared at another banquet to find little Bai, I introduced myself, and she knew that my name was Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Tianzong's younger brother, King Xiaoyao of Beihai. I have a name. I have a name. My name is Wang Xiaoyao. My name is Wang Xiaoyao. Is this name important? Flaming Fire, Mochizuki Song, Queen of Darkness. Tell me, is this name important? Yes. Yes. Is it important? Mochizuki Song was silent. The memory from a few years ago began to become clear. She remembered that night. She remembered the banquet when Zhang Xiaohua took Wang Xiaoyao to her and Qin Wei Bai. At that time, she quietly looked at Zhang Xiaohua and said Wang Xiaoyao's identity. Looking at the cold and reserved boss, she just nodded and said softly with a smile. Your brother is talented, bold, and skilled in both the pen and the sword. The name of Sword Emperor resounds like thunder in my ears. I respect him very much. From that moment on, Mochizuki-song was very sure that her boss did not take King Xiaorao of the Wang family of Beihai seriously at all. Therefore, at the banquet a month later, when Wang Xiaoyao walked up to her alone and introduced himself as Wang Xiaoyao, Qin Weibai seemed to have forgotten the previous meeting that had not caused any ripples. So she repeated what she had said before. Your brother is talented, bold, and skilled in both the pen and the sword. The name of Sword Emperor resounds like thunder in my ears. I respect him very much. Wang Xiaoyao was important. King Xiaorao of Beihai was important. So was the name Wang Xiaorao important? Different people had different answers in their hearts. It was just that after so many years, this answer had long become clear and deeply rooted in Wang Xiaoyao's mind. He had a name. His name was Wang Xiaoyao. For him, it was more important than anything else. I can also do something for Beihai. Wang Shengxiao murmured to himself in a low voice. He squinted and smiled. Many people will talk about me in secret. Without my brother, I would be nothing. I often ask myself, without Wang Tianzong, I would be nothing. I don't know the answer. His tone was very serious. Rather than talking to Mochizuki-song, it was better to say that he was hypnotizing himself. But I want to try. The little guy is too young, and the old guy is useless. Wang Xiaoyao said with a smile. Only I can make Beihai better. In everyone's eyes, you are destroying Beihai. Mochizuki-song gave a rare response. Beihai will not be destroyed. At this moment, everything it has experienced now is nirvana. He looked at the fire on Mount Dibbing and whispered, Rebirth from the fire. I want to do something for Beihai. I have to do something. He looked at Mochizuki-song. How about you and I do it together? You don't deserve it. Mochizuki-song answered without hesitation. She suddenly thought of something, and a strange look flashed in her eyes. She deliberately said sarcastically, If it's your brother, it's more like it. But King Xiaoyao can't. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly fell silent. The wind and snow fell. At 5:40 in the morning, it was still night. The deep night suddenly became incomparably oppressive. After today, I won't be King Xiaoyao anymore. The whole world will know that my name is Wang Xiaorao. Wang Xiaoyao said lightly. A strong aura began to surge. His tone gradually became cold. After today, if you can survive, then we'll talk about it. Mochizuki-song confronted him with tit for tat. One has to do one thing in life. Wang Xiaoyao was expressionless. I have a woman I love the most. I'm not afraid of being laughed at. She can really extinguish all my ambitions, all my longings, and make me willing to be a coward. If I could be with her, today's events would not have happened. I was even willing to go to your Samsara palace for her. I once regarded being with her as the most important thing. But she became Li Tianlan's woman, and I failed. But I have to do something. I didn't get the woman I love the most, but others can't take away Mount Dibbing that raised me. He looked in the direction of Li Tianlan from afar, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. When I set foot on the top of that mountain, maybe I still have a chance to have what I lost. Buzz. The moment Wang Xiaorao turned his head, Mochizuki-song, who had been preparing for a long time to seize his flaws, suddenly made a move without any hesitation. The surging sword energy around her converged and condensed in an instant. The wind and snow scattered wildly. The surging sword energy directly condensed into a tiny but extremely bright light. The moment Mochizuki-sang's figure flashed, the condensed sword energy had already stabbed in front of Wang Xiaoyao along with the sword edge. The temperature under the night sky plummeted. The wind and snow between heaven and earth completely turned into a huge vortex at the same time as the sword edge flashed. The vortex spread out, and the area became larger and larger. The snowflakes within a radius of hundreds of meters were completely attracted by the sword energy. 24 moves of sword, 5th blade, flying snow. The heavy snow was like a curtain, and the world was vast. The pure white quickly twisted and rotated, and the sword edge advanced forward, directly shrouding Wang Xiaoyao's figure. It was bitterly cold. The swirling snow vortex began to shrink with Wang Xiaoyao as the center. Mochizuki-sang stood outside the snow curtain. Wang Xiaoyao was completely shrouded in snow. The cicadas kept vibrating, and Mochizuki-sang's light figure seemed to become a weightless shadow at this moment. The shadow turned around the shrinking snow curtain, like light and lightning. The cicada's sword edge pierced the snow curtain again, and again with the extremely sharp sword energy. This scene looked like a faint shadow wielding a sword, circling around a large snow tornado and stabbing forward. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of the collision of swords and sabers rang out intensely, like a storm. Mochizuki-sang's eyes were deathly still, and her spirit was condensed like never before. In front of her, the tornado condensed by snowflakes completely enveloped Wang Xiaoyao. While blocking his vision, the increasingly violent sword energy penetrated through the snow curtain tornado. The sword energy was surging like a tide, and the whole world seemed to be shaking violently. From the sky to the ground. Flying snow fell from the sky. On the ground, countless broken trees and fallen leaves flew at the same time. At this moment, everything within the scope of Mochizuki-sang's sword energy seemed to become the sword in her hand. Every snowflake, every fallen leaf, every wisp of cold wind, the sky and the earth were all sharp. The sound of the collision of swords and sabers became more and more intense. The scope of the snow curtain tornado was still shrinking. This also meant that Wang Xiaoyao's scope of activity was getting smaller and smaller. Every snowflake in the tornado was blooming with sword energy, trying to completely tear Wang Xiaoyao's body apart. The cicada's cry pierced in again and again, and every sword was aimed at Wang Xiaoyao's vital parts. The scope of the snow curtain tornado was shrinking faster and faster. The speed of Mochizuki-sang's sword began to slow down, but it became heavier and heavier. In the tornado, Wang Xiaoyao, whose scope of activity had been shrinking, remained silent, but the strength of his saber was increasing at the same time. Countless fallen leaves, dead branches, stones, and even dust rose from the ground. The speed was constantly accelerating, and the momentum was becoming sharper and sharper. The shining blade of the cicadas once again stabbed into the wind and snow. The blade with violent power chopped on the blade of the cicadas almost at the same time. Mochizuki-sang's figure paused slightly. In an instant, the light that had been attached to the blade, condensed by the sword energy all over the sky, directly exploded in the snow curtain tornado that was about to shrink to the limit. The strong light directly covered the wind and snow. Between heaven and earth, within a range of hundreds of meters, everything that could be controlled was madly accelerating, stabbing Wang Xiaoyao's position. Heaven and earth were like swords. Mochizuki-sang's face was slightly pale for a moment, and there was a slight fluctuation in her breath. In the next second, her entire face instantly changed. The snow curtain tornado that was still condensed began to expand without warning. The huge tornado stagnated for a moment, and the wind and snow in the sky began to spin in the opposite direction incredibly. The flying wind and snow rose against the sky, and the leaves and dead branches that pierced upward on the ground accelerated to fall. The countless sword energy that Mochizuki-sang had stabbed into the tornado began to spread outward. Everything seemed to be completely reversed in an instant. Everything created by Mochizuki-sang began to move in the opposite direction. Boom! In the loud rumbling sound, the snow curtain tornado, which had been condensing and shrinking, suddenly spread out in the opposite direction at a speed countless times faster than before, enveloping the figure of Mochizuki-sang. Wang Xiaoyao's voice came from the dancing wind and snow. Have you forgotten what the strongest martial arts in Beihai is? The strongest in Beihai was naturally swordsmanship. And in Beihai's swordsmanship, The strongest was the 6 Paths of Reincarnation sword. This is my reincarnation. In the voice that was almost murmuring to himself, Wang Xiaoyao's breath began to rise endlessly. His figure moved forward in the swirling snowflakes. Countless snowflakes were still flying with sword energy, but they were guided by countless blade lights to fly in the opposite direction from Wang Xiaoyao. You refused my invitation to cooperate. His voice carried a hint of laughter, but it was extremely cold and deranged. Then, the huge blade of the famous saber named Millennium was raised. The handle was held in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. It was the palm that had been showing sincerity before. Left hand. Left-handed saber. Holding the blade in his left hand, Wang Xiaoyao's breath had reached the extreme. It was a kind of indescribable thick and domineering. It could destroy heaven and earth and was irresistible. His body began to accelerate. His aura continued to rise, and in an instant, he easily crossed the threshold. The threshold that countless invincible realm experts dreamed of, but could not get for their whole lives. The peak of the invincible realm. It was not close, not infinitely close, not almost. It was the real, complete, and at the peak. In this era, the only expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world, Wang Xiaoyao. Flaming Fire's pupils suddenly contracted for a moment. Was it an accident? Was it a shock? Perhaps all of them were present, but all of this wasn't unacceptable. Wang Xiaoyao, the peak of the invincible realm. No one knew when he entered the invincible realm, when he stabilized his realm, and when he officially entered the peak of the invincible realm. What he showed to the world was always what was on the surface. But in front of Mount Dibing, for the sake of Beihai and his position as the patriarch, Wang Xiaoyao no longer held back when facing a strong enemy. The strongest super master of the Samsara Palace, the Queen of Darkness. No matter who it was, he would completely tear up the opponent in the fastest time with the most crushing posture, and then kill Mount Dibing. He gave her a chance. But it was a pity. If she didn't retreat, she would die. The breath belonging to the peak of the invincible realm rushed into the sky with the saber light in an instant, completely suppressing the sword intent and sword energy around Flaming Fire. Wang Xiaoyao raised Millennium in his hand. His temperament suddenly became extremely quiet, but there was absolute madness in it. The almost out-of-control power kept colliding in the saber light, and heaven and earth seemed to be shaking violently. The hysterical and crazy killing intent completely locked on Mochizuki and Song. Wang Xiaoyao's voice was cold. This saber is called World's Edge. Wang Xiaoyao's saber. The saber at the peak of the invincible realm. The bright and turbulent saber light suddenly bloomed in the night, moving forward with indomitable momentum and determination. The saber. It was a domineering weapon that could only advance and not retreat. The saber light, like a raging tide, completely broke the night sky and the world. In the endless light, Wang Xiaoyao's figure looked conceited and proud. He didn't even look at Flaming Fire. His eyes fell in the direction of Mount Dibing. Across that mountain, the whole world would officially see him. Not the younger brother of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, not King Xiaoyao of Beihai. The whole world would see the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The saber light and power of the peak of the invincible realm. This year, Wang Xiaoyao was 38 years old. At the age of 38, he reached the peak of the invincible realm. In the wind and snow, he tightly pursed his lips. His name was Wang Xiaorao. In this world, in this era, he deserved his own name. Chapter 1013. At any time and in any era, the peak of the invincible realm meant the top combat capability in the dark world. On some specific battlefields, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm was almost synonymous with destroying the world. Before this saber strike, no one would associate this word with Wang Xiaorao. The dark world had an impression of Wang Xiaoyao. King Xiaoyao of Beihai, Wang Tianzong's younger brother. No one would ignore such a figure. Before he broke with Mount Dibing, in everyone's eyes, he was a relatively unrestrained figure. His prominent identity, gentle personality, generous way of doing things, and handsome appearance were all important reasons to make countless ladies fall in love with him. Wang Xiaoyao's life had always been unrestrained, but he had also done some absurd things. In conclusion, in the eyes of the dark world, Wang Xiaoyao was roughly a playboy of Beihai who had excellent martial arts talent. but was not willing to work hard. Even if he could enter the invincible realm, this impression had not changed much. Until now. The saber of the peak of the invincible realm. The saber light all over the sky not only shattered the sword energy of Wang Yueshwanga, but also completely shattered the impression of him in the dark world. Beihai, which inherited swordsmanship, had produced many saber masters. But when it came to the saber of Beihai, people would think of DK, who was known as Heaven Saber, and Dijiang, who had double thunder veins. Even people's evaluation of Wang Xiaoyao was not as good as Dijiang, who was locked up in Beihai prison. This night, Wang Xiaoyao raised the blade in his hand and told the whole dark world the clearest fact. His name was Wang Xiaorao. He was the only expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world. He was also the #1 saber grandmaster in the dark world. The saber light broke through the air. So close yet so far away. With almost incomprehensible power, the huge blade directly chopped down from above Wang Yueshwanga. It was swift, powerful, ruthless, and domineering. The saber light was blooming everywhere between heaven and earth. The saber light gushed from the ground and fell from the sky. Snowflakes scattered, and the sound of the wind was scattered. Vaguely, the ancient blade seemed to occupy the whole sky in an instant, chopping down with an unstoppable momentum. There seemed to be an error in perception. Mochizuki Seiko felt that his movements began to slow down. It was also like Wang Xiaoyao's saber was too fast. Within the range covered by the saber light, some rules about speed seemed to be modified a little. In a weak but extremely clear sense of disorder, Mochizuki Seiko lifted the sword edge. Clang! The huge blade slashed down on the sword's edge. Mochizuki Song's movements slowed down for a moment. Before she could raise the sword in her hand, the blade had already smashed down. At the same time, the saber radiance that filled the world vibrated. In the next instant, Mochizuki Song's body burst with blood. This was an absolute suppression of power. This was the absolute suppression of the saber gleam against the sword aura. In this state, even if Wang Xiaoyao was at the peak of the invincible realm, he could be regarded as an expert. Blood splashed in the saber light. Wang Xiaoyao's figure did not hesitate. With a flash of light, he held the hilt of the saber, and the huge blade directly stabbed Mochizuki Song's heart. Mochizuki Hikari, whose body was shaking violently, turned pale. The injuries she had been suppressing were almost completely unleashed by this slash. There were no fancy moves or changes in this slash. Tinya. This was one of the strongest moves in Wang Xiaoyao's martial arts that had gradually become a system of its own. It was also the simplest move. It was simple and didn't even have any changes. This was the perfect combination of the purest strength and speed. And it was also the essence of Beihai martial arts. In a space similar to a domain constructed by infinite saber light, when the opponent's perception of speed was wrong, this slash with pure strength and speed could completely crush everything. The blade came head-on. Mochizuki Song's violently shaking figure moved horizontally for a moment with difficulty. Before she could stand firm, Wang Xiaoyao, who had already appeared in front of her, fiercely chopped down again. It was like silver lightning splitting the sky. The moment the saber and the sword collided, Mochizuki Song, whose whole body was burning with sword energy, was directly chopped down from midair. Her body fell rapidly like a meteor. The saber was like thunder. She was like a fierce tiger. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were shining. Without the slightest hesitation, he held the saber and pounced straight down from the air. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's whole body carried a kind of undisguised wildness and insolence, like a beast hunting its prey. The two of them fell rapidly, one up and the other down. Wang Xiaoyao raised his saber. It was still chopping down. The moment Mochizuki Song's figure landed, she directly abandoned the so-called image and rolled on the ground. As soon as her body moved, the huge and bright saber directly chopped the ground from her side. Boom! The loud sound even suppressed all the sounds on Mount Dibbing not far away for a moment. Under the night sky, in the flying snow, the saber light stretched all the way from midair to the ground. The moment the saber chopped the ground, there was a loud sound like an explosion. The bright saber light bloomed unscrupulously and destroyed everything. The transparent shock wave mixed with the saber light spread out in all directions. The forest hundreds of meters nearby was completely torn apart by the crazy saber light in an instant. Tree trunks, leaves, and grass were all torn into powder. The ground collapsed, and the water under the ground suddenly sprayed into the sky under great pressure. A large pit of about 300 or 400 meters abruptly appeared on the flat ground. The water under the ground continued to spread up. Although Mochizuki-san's body avoided the saber, the huge force directly swept her into the air. At the moment when her body lost balance, Wang Xiaoyao, who was in a very stable state, flashed to Mochizuki-san again with a cold expression. Chopping, sweeping and lifting. Countless attacks broke out at the same time like a storm. The saber and sword collided, and the saber light was unparalleled and fierce. Countless rays of light were surging and mighty. All the sword light was torn apart little by little again. This was a head-on suppression of strength, fair and square. She couldn't even find a chance to fight back. The saber light completely shattered the sword energy, and completely enveloped Mochizuki-san. In an instant Mochizuki-san, whose face was almost bloodless, raised the blade. 21st blade shatter of land. The surging sword energy burst out from Mochizuki-san's body. She held cicada cry and stabbed forward. At the same time, the saber light all over the sky suddenly converged. The mountains and rivers were not broken, but they suddenly disappeared. Mochizuki-san, who stabbed forward, suddenly lost balance. Her swaying body staggered a step forward. The saber light swept over silently. Flaming Fire's face changed dramatically. Regardless of the aggravation of her injury, she suddenly changed the attack direction of the blade, trying to block the blade sweeping over from the side. But she was still a second too late. Her body tried to dodge. The next moment, the saber light tore her flesh. Mochizuki-san's arm holding the sword suddenly rose into the sky. An extremely sharp killing intent suddenly came from a distance, and firmly locked on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao was not afraid at all. He turned and looked in the direction of Mount Dibing. Facing His Majesty, the only one recognized by the dark world on Mount Dibing, he laughed wildly. Li Tianlan, do you dare to fight with me? Chapter 10:14. Wang Xiaoyao's voice spread far away in the night with the power of the peak invincible realm. It was passionate and indulgent, like a thunder echoing near Mount Dibing. Everyone on Mount Dibing heard this sentence. It was a sentence that could be said to be overestimating one's capabilities, but it was also extremely provocative. Since Li Tianlan entered the secular world, he had met people he couldn't beat, but there was no one he didn't dare to beat. Wang Xiaoyao's words were tantamount to a great humiliation. Wind and snow filled the sky. A large expanse of wind and snow swirled wildly around Wang Xiaoyao's body. The ancient giant blade pointed at Li Tianlan from a distance. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's whole body was filled with an indescribable arrogance. On Mount Dibing, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. His gaze pierced through the fluttering snow and saw the fresh blood in the snow. Mochizuki-san's arm fluttered in the air, and a large amount of blood flowed from her amputated arm. Under the immense pain, her face contorted slightly, and her condition fell to rock bottom in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao won. It was an incomparably straightforward suppression. What he won wasn't just victory or defeat, he also won life and death. With the ancient blade, he could take Mochizuki-san's life at any time. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Xiaoyao's saber quietly. He looked at Wang Xiaoyao's face. Wang Xiaoyao was also looking at him from afar with a sneer on his face. The moment Wang Xiaoyao cut off moon gaze and song, the killing intent that almost froze the space came from Li Tianlan. No matter what had happened between Mochizuki-san and Qin Weibai after the destruction of the Samsara Palace, her appearance here today had already shown her attitude. More than 2 years ago in Reki City, on the night of the trial day, Raphael of the Dark Knights almost saved Li Tianlan at the cost of serious injuries that he had not yet recovered from. Their friendship in the past meant that Li Tianlan could not watch Mochizuki-san die. A warning from a few kilometers away was indeed a powerful deterrent. The perfection of Li Tianlan's martial arts and the power of ruthlessness were enough to allow Li Tianlan to appear in front of Wang Xiaoyao despite the distance of a few kilometers in an instant. At that time, Wang Xiaoyao's fate might not be better than Mochizuki-san's. It might even be more miserable. But the problem was, did Li Tianlan dare? Wang Xiaoyao laughed more and more wildly. His low voice seemed very light in the night, but it echoed throughout the whole world. "You don't dare, do you?" Li Tianlan did not speak. Raging fire was everywhere on Mount Dibing. The fire spread and exploded in the air. This was almost the last power on Mount Dibing. Heaven Punishment Unit. To be more precise, they were the backup forces of the Heaven Punishment Troop. The genuine All Heavens Troop was fighting back against Kanglan Army. At the moment, those who were left on Mount Dibing were 200 reserve members of the All Heavens Troop, as well as 1 expert of the half-step invincible realm, and 3 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, who barely stayed after Wang Shengxiao had shown all his strength. This was all the power of Beihai on Mount Dibing. It seemed that since the establishment of the Wang family of Beihai, the force of Mount Dibing had never been so stretched. This was naturally due to the fact that the combined strength of the allied forces was too great. It was also because Wang Xiaoniao took away some high-end combat power. 200 fire-flaming realm experts cooperated with several experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Several experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm assisted the only expert of the half-step invincible realm. They barely formed a relatively smaller Heaven Punishment Sword formation. The tacit cooperation almost made more than 200 people completely become one person. The raging fire that was enough to burn everything kept sweeping. The entire Mount Dibing was within the scope of the sword formation. The sword energy shown in the sword formation. Li Tianlan, who was transformed by the startling sword, blocked Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurasumi alone in the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. Most of the power of the Heaven Punishment Sword formation was poured on Moraid. The saber light was invincible. Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm from the allied forces were almost unrestrained. Tianhai Wuji was the #1 expert in East Island. He was a great grandmaster of East Island who had entered the top 10 of the World Divine List 6 or 7 years ago. Although he had not officially stepped into the peak of the invincible realm, he was not far from that realm. The saber of Wuji Palace was swift and fierce. Tianhai Wuji personally took action, together with more than a dozen experts of the invincible realm. Almost at the moment of the battle, the reserve troop of the Heaven Punishment Force was shaky. The reserve force of the Heaven Punishment Force was constantly decreasing. The startling sword turned blue. The ruthless energy was not fast, but it was consumed very steadily. The sword formation of the 13-story buildings made Li Tianlan feel the ruthless state at any time. There were attacks from all directions. Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm were tearing the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. At the same time, they were also cooperating with Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurasumi to interfere with Li Tianlan's famous sword doppelganger. Everyone could see that the power of Mount Dibing was hard to hold on. If several experts of the invincible realm broke out with all their strength, Li Tianlan's famous sword doppelganger could retreat unscathed, but the All-Heaven Sword formation was destined to suffer heavy losses. In its heyday, the full All-Heaven Sword formation could fight against experts at the peak of the invincible realm. But now the reserve force of the All-Heaven Sword formation was different. For the real All-Heaven army, the number of people was reduced by a third, and the number of experts of the thunder-shocking realm was even lower. They were not only facing Moraid, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, but also Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm. It was impossible for the All-Heaven Sword formation to resist. Wang Shengxiao's original plan was to use the All-Heaven Sword formation as a supplement, and the absolute strong firepower coverage of Mount Dibing as the main force. At the beginning of the final battle, as soon as the communication was restored, Mount Dibing had already started all the weapon systems and strictly planned the range and firepower. In the many simulations in advance, even if it was the worst result, the situation would be beneficial to Beihai. Of course, Wang Shengxiao could think of East Island. With the support of his expectations and the results of many simulations, Mount Dibing was almost sure that even if they were attacked by the firepower of East Island, the fully activated weapon systems of Mount Dibing were enough to cause a fatal threat to several experts of the invincible realm on the mountain at this time. Even if they couldn't hurt Jiang Shangyu, when thousands of weapon terminals burst out at the same time, they could consume most of Jiang Shangyu's physical strength. East Island had an accident before the war, and the weapon control system hadn't been taken back yet. What was even more ridiculous was that East Island hadn't found it yet. Wang Shengxiao looked calm and collected, but he was ecstatic in his heart. More than once, he complained that the other side was a complete idiot. His wealth had been F***king emptied, but he still didn't know it. He was simply a weirdo in the international history of the past 100 years. And because of this, he was more confident in the final battle. Without the threat from East Island, the weapons on Mount Dibbing could crush everything without any scruples. This was the best situation. Yagyu Kuromi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guoqiu, Morade, Jiang Shangyu and Wang Xiaorao. Joint forces. Such a lineup was indeed suffocating. But once the weapon system on Mount Dibbing started firing, Wang Shengxiao could be sure that at least the weakest Yagyu Kuromi and Jiang Guoqiu were doomed to die, unless Jiang Shangyu saved them at the cost of his physical strength. When the suppression of firepower was over, the forces of all heavens could come out to clean up the mess and further weaken their state and physical strength. Then it was time for Li Tianlan to come in and harvest this era. But Wang Shengxiao didn't expect that when several invincible realm experts stepped into the range of firepower, nothing happened on Mount Dibbing. Wu Qinggu, who had been the most loyal to Mount Dibbing, was missing. All the weapon systems in Beihai were locked. Although Wang Xiaorao was temporarily stalled by Moongei's song, the forces of all heavens were going to face several invincible realm experts in their heyday. Such a situation was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for Wang Shengxiao. Wu Qinggu, this uncle whom he had always trusted the most, stabbed him in the back when he needed strength the most. A near-fatal stab. The situation in front of him was slowly collapsing at an unchangeable speed. Wang Shengxiao suddenly glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood where he was in silence, motionless. Wang Shengxiao understood Li Tianlan's difficulties very well. As East Emperor, he was really in a difficult position now. The collapse of Mount Dibbing was happening little by little. But until now Jiang Shangyu had not made a move. He quietly floated in the air, observing Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao, with a kind of calmness that everything was under control. With the power of the joint forces at this time, they could speed up the collapse of Mount Dibbing several times, even dozens of times. If several invincible realm experts were willing to pay some price, such as some moderate injuries, they could even make the situation of Mount Dibbing collapse in an instant and destroy all the forces that could resist on Mount Dibbing. But they had never done so. From beginning to end. Because once the Sky Punishment Sword formation was broken, they would face Li Tianlan with all his strength. Because Jiang Shangyu had not made a move yet. And because Li Guangtu had not appeared yet. Wang Shengxiao's eyes were a little self-deprecating and sarcastic. Obviously, in the hearts of the joint forces at this time, although this was the final battle of Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai was no longer important. This had become the battlefield against the young East Emperor. So the joint forces were deliberately pulling the battle situation. The key to breaking the situation was the battle between Moongei's song and Wang Xiaorao. Wang Xiaorao had the ability to kill Moongei's song. Li Tianlan had the ability and reason to save Moongei's song from Wang Xiaorao. When the battle situation was in a stalemate, once Moongei's song was in a life-or-death crisis and Li Tianlan tried his best to kill Wang Xiaoyao, it was likely that Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu would break out with all their strength. The final result of the final battle of Beihai was the moment that could happen at any time. So the battle situation on Mount Dibbing was in a stalemate. Tianhai Wuji was not in a hurry to break the situation. And Wang Xiaoyao was not in a hurry to kill Moongei's song. He used himself as bait to provoke Li Tianlan, waiting for Li Tianlan to take the bait. He was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. And judging from the strength he had hidden for a long time and exposed at this time, even among the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, he was not weak. If Li Tianlan wanted to injure or even kill him in an instant, he had to do it in person, or he had to break out his energy mercilessly. Wang Xiaoyao was the only expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world. Such a Wang Xiaoyao was much more difficult to deal with than Gu Xingyun. Li Tianlan could only choose one of them. Wang Yuesong had to be saved. No matter which one Li Tianlan chose, it was completely acceptable to the joint forces. If Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, who were probably nearby, attacked with all their strength at the same time, Li Tianlan was likely to die on the spot. At worst, he would be seriously injured and have to withdraw from the battle in North Sea. If Wu Qing took action, he would have to bear the full force of Wang Xiaoyao's outburst, coupled with the cooperation of Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu. Even if Wu Qing could save Meng Xiang'a, he would inevitably exhaust all his energy. At that time, Tianhai Wuji would break the deadlock and Li Tianlan would have to face a siege. Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, two superiors who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaonao was at the peak of the invincible realm. Tianhai Wuji and Moraid were close to the peak of the invincible realm. Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurumi were two invincible realm experts, and more than a dozen top superiors of the half-step invincible realm. This lineup was almost more exaggerated than the one that besieged Wang Tianzong and Mormons. Without ruthlessness, it was impossible for Li Tianlan to block it. The joint forces didn't even need to pay a price to heavily injure him. How could Li Tianlan choose? Give up Meng Xiang'a? According to Wang Shengxiao's understanding of him, this option almost didn't exist. In contrast, it was more likely for Li Tianlan to give up the final battle in Beihai. Wang Shengxiao sighed softly. His body slowly moved forward in the air, passing by the silent Li Tianlan. Second uncle. His voice spread far away in the night with the wind and snow. This was the darkest time before dawn. Wang Shengxiao's voice was steady and calm. Let me play with you? Countless eyes focused on Wang Shengxiao at once. Jiang Shangyu Moraid, Tianhai Wuji, the eyes of several superiors of the invincible realm froze at the same time. On the stalemate battlefield, the pressure on the troops of all heavens and aquamarine suddenly relaxed for a moment. In the next second, all eyes shifted away from Wang Shengxiao. With Wang Shengxiao hiding his strength before, the moment Wang Shengxiao spoke, everyone thought that Wang Shengxiao was also hiding his strength. However, at this time, he just stood there, showing the aura of the half-step invincible realm. The strength of the half-step invincible realm was already unexpected. But to play with Wang Xiaoyao? Wang Xiaoyao stood in the air, and the eyes of uncle and nephew collided fiercely with each other thousands of meters away. Wang Shengxiao smiled and said softly, "Do you deserve it? If you can't afford to play, you will die. Whoever can't afford to play will die." Wang Shengxiao looked at Wang Xiaoyao and said softly. Wang Xiaoyao sneered. His eyes passed over Wang Shengxiao and locked on Li Tianlan. At this point, he indeed had the capital to look down on Wang Shengxiao. Wang Yueshuanga's slightly trembling body was lying in front of Wang Shengxiao at this time, and the broken arm was still sprinkled with blood. The blade was placed above Wang Yueshuanga's head. Wang Shengxiao looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold voice, "I'll count to 3. If you don't come, she will die." 3. Li Tianlan suddenly narrowed his eyes. The 13 floors kept rotating around him, getting clearer and clearer. He knew Wang Xiaoyao's plan. But there were some things that one couldn't avoid being fooled after knowing. This was an overt plot on the battlefield. Wang Xiaoyao twitched the corner of his mouth and said directly, 1. There was no 2. As his voice fell, the ancient giant blade suddenly pressed down. Wang Xiaoyao. Suddenly, a huge resistance came from the edge of the blade. Amidst the snow, Mochizuki-song suddenly stretched out his hand and blocked the blade that was pressing down. An unprecedented aura suddenly rose from Wang Yueshuanga's body. It was indifferent, fake, but it continued to grow stronger. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and seemed a little surprised. Crack. At the same time, in the cabin of the helicopter over East Island, Xianyuan Wushang, who had been watching the scene of Mount Dibbing, suddenly twisted the bottle of pure water in his hand. He stared at Wang Yueshuanga on the screen, stunned, and stood up subconsciously. "What's this?" he subconsciously cried out in surprise. "Fraud," Xing Tian said in a deep voice. Chapter 10:15. Fraud. Fraud. Xianyuan Wushang unconsciously wiped the pure water that he had sprayed on himself because he was too excited. He muttered to himself. After a long while he looked at Xing Tian. "Are you kidding me? That's the truth." Xing Tian's voice was low and solemn. "Young master, I'm more sensitive than you in this regard. I'm sure that her current state is fraud." All the astonishment and disbelief on Xianyuan Wushang's chubby face gradually disappeared. His harmless face gradually became serious. Xing Tian did not move. The young master in front of him, who might be very funny and didn't care about his image, had a majesty that made people unable to look at him directly once he became serious. But the environment here is not right. This is even more incredible than when Big Brother defeated Jiang Shangyu. No, it's not incredible. It's completely impossible. Xing Tian lowered his head and wanted to say something but stopped. What do you want to say? Xianyuan Wushang rolled his eyes. There was a trace of light in his usually innocent eyes. There's a precedent for a similar situation. Xing Tian whispered. Who? Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows. Duke guarding Duke. Xing Tian's voice was filled with awe. The corner of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched. It seemed that he wanted to curse, but after twitching for a long time, he didn't say anything in the end. The so-called Duke guarding Duke was not a person. Perhaps it was a person, but under such circumstances, the identity that Xing Tian mentioned represented a group of people. But no matter which one of those people, what right did the Song of the Full Moon have to compare with them? You. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and slowly spat out a noun that he had just learned. Are you bullshitting me? If it exists, it makes sense. Xing Tian said in a low muffled voice. Xianyuan Wushang stood motionless and was silent for a long time. Maybe when this is over, I should talk to sister-in-law. He whispered to himself. It's the sleeping sister-in-law. If there's anything special about the Song of the Full Moon, it's probably that she used to follow sister-in-law all year round. This is an unexpected discovery. You can mention it at the next meeting. Maybe someone will be interested in it. Xing Tian said softly. This is not a good thing. Xianyuan Wushang said expressionlessly. This is not a good thing for anyone, so there is no need to mention it. He looked at Xing Tian and said calmly, keep this a secret. Yes. Xing Tian lowered his head. Fraud, fraud. Tisk, Xianyuan Wushang muttered to himself. In the end he shook his head and sighed. What came to his mind was the glorious history of this word, which was enough to make one's blood boil. He looked at the receding night under the helicopter. This was the place he had always dreamed of, but at this time, when he saw the Plenilune hymn and Li Tianlan, he sincerely sighed and said, I miss home. Xing Tian looked at him silently. After a while he said, me too. The corners of Xianyuan Wushang's eyes twitched slightly. Only then did he remember his mission. He wouldn't stay here for long and would return soon. As for Xing Tian, while this is so bitter, so miserable. Ahem, Xianyuan Wushang coughed and stiffly changed the topic. Now that I think about it, Duke guarding Duke's daughter is really beautiful. I haven't seen her for a long time. Xing Tian's voice was calm. Xianyuan Wushang was speechless. The helicopter flew through the night and approached Ninghu. The sound of fighting rang from a distance. This was their second stop after arriving in East Island. The two successfully met with Situt Songyue 2 hours ago and completely stabilized the situation. The headquarters of Wuji Palace, which was almost empty, was almost completely destroyed. The remaining forces fled. Situt Songyue was concentrating on dealing with the mess. Xianyuan Wushang, who had been controlling all the communications in East Island, immediately noticed the abnormality in the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School and rushed over without hesitation. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School in Ninghu was already a mess. Fighting and chaos spread rapidly. This place, which was supposed to be defenseless, had now become the biggest trap of East Island. Yagyu Tsangqiuan, the leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School, was a disciple of Jiang Shangyu. If there were benefits, he would naturally give them to his own people and allies. Therefore, as early as a few days ago, all the 2,000 saint warriors that Jiang Shangyu borrowed from the Holy Land were placed in Jifeng Sword Raining School, including the commander of the 2,000 saint warriors, Gravedust, who was now the new commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Holy Land. After the chaos in Snow Country, for more than 2 years, the Holy Land had done everything to cultivate a new invincible realm expert. Therefore, when Saint led the Nightmare Army to attack Jifeng Sword Raining School, it was tantamount to stepping directly into Jiang Shangyu's trap. On the side of Wuji Palace, the other side was retreating. On the side of Jifeng Sword Raining School, the fierce fighting had continued from the beginning to the present. Not only did the nightmare army of Emperor Dong's palace not gain the upper hand, but it was also vaguely suppressed by the Holy Disarmament Corps. The only thing that could stabilize the morale of the nightmare army was the battle of the invincible realm experts. The shining sword energy collided wildly with the domain. When Xianyuan Wushang arrived, the battle between Saint and Gravedust had almost reached its climax. The constantly surging domain and the crisscrossing sword energy almost affected the nearby space. Even the flight of the helicopter became a little unstable. Is this the invincible realm? Xianyuan Wushang whispered to himself and glanced at Xing Tian. Xing Tian looked at Xianyuan Wushang silently, as if he was still immersed in the mood of wanting to go back. The atmosphere in the cabin was silent and awkward. Xianyuan Wushang looked at the battle on the ground that had casualties and frowned slightly. That man. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly pointed at Gravedust, who was entangled with Saint. I don't like him. Xing Tian was a little confused. Don't you King want to be a PE teacher in Tiannan? Then why don't you show your skills to Emperor Dong's palace? Otherwise you will be sent to be a security guard sooner or later. Xianyuan Wushang scolded him jokingly and kicked Xing Tian's leg. His finger was still pointing at Gravedust. Make him disappear. Xing Tian, who was kicked, didn't shake at all. He thought about it seriously, nodded, and opened the door of the helicopter. The battle between the two invincible realm experts became more and more intense. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes subconsciously. His eyes fell on Gravedust. This new invincible realm expert, who had been cultivated by the Holy Land at all costs for 2 years, was tall and straight, and his blonde hair was like a burning fire. Although he was at a disadvantage in the battle with Saint after the spirit coronation, his absolutely sharp spiritual willpower after the coronation made his reaction extremely fast. Now, although he was injured, he didn't show any signs of defeat. The moment Xing Tian's eyes fell on him, Gravedust suddenly turned back and also locked his eyes on Xing Tian. Their eyes met in midair for a moment. Out of an instinctive reaction, Gravedust's hair suddenly stood on end. The instinctive sense of danger seemed to pierce into his body in an instant, deep into his internal organs, bone marrow, and every drop of blood. Xing Tian in his sight seemed to be a huge beast that was countless times more dangerous than Saint. Danger was screaming. But in his perception, Saint's huge figure had no aura at all. His tall body bent slightly and walked out of the cabin. The wind roared, the domain raged, and the sword energy flew. He stood in midair motionless. Without any hesitation, the domain around Gravedust suddenly expanded, and the extreme eruption of power temporarily forced military counselor to retreat. Gravedust turned around and ran without hesitation. Dignity, reputation, glory, status, and everything else provided that he was alive. He didn't know why he was afraid, but the moment he saw Xing Tian, every cell in his body seemed to remind him that death was close at hand. He used all of his power to strengthen his domain. He didn't have any fighting spirit. He only thought about running for his life. The domain squeezed the space and became more and more condensed. In the shortest time, it directly solidified to the limit. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes and stretched out his hands. His aura was still calm, but as he stretched out his hands, the whole space suddenly let out an extremely harsh and sharp whistle. Xing Tian's palms were empty. In the eyes of everyone who saw this scene, the night sky seemed to be clearly deformed in Xing Tian's hands. The endless night turned into a giant bow nearly 3 meters long. He drew the bow and put the arrow on it. The night wind suddenly disappeared, and the night was suddenly chaotic. Xing Tian, who had no aura from beginning to end, stood in the air like an ordinary person. The giant bow condensed by the night was as black as ink in his hand. The dark bowstring was pulled back for a moment. He loosened his palm. The giant bow suddenly dissipated. There were no arrows in the air. But heaven and earth were completely quiet. The night was frozen, and there was no wind or snow. It was dead silent. Gravedust, who had escaped hundreds of meters away, turned around in horror. He opened his mouth and shouted something. It seemed that he was begging, cursing, and cursing. What he saw was only the back of Xing Tian, who bent over and curled back into the cabin. In his sight, his domain began to break without any stagnation. It was broken in all directions. The solid domain seemed to have encountered an invisible force and was shattered into powder without resistance in an instant. It was silent. The broken domain completely swallowed up Gravedust's figure. Gravedust's figure disappeared. It looked like his figure was completely swallowed up by the broken domain. There was no blood, no light, and nothing. An invincible realm expert just disappeared. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School was dead silent. Boom. After the invisible arrow, there was a sudden burst of real thunder in the night sky. Lightning cut through the sky. The winter thunder rumbled. Before dawn, it began to rain in Ninghu. Xing Tian got back into the cabin and sat down in a corner. He was ordinary and had no momentum before killing people. After killing people, he was still ordinary and had no momentum. His body was too big, so he looked like a doormat when he was nestled in the cabin. Good job. Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes wandered, and his voice was a little erratic. Xing Tianxia raised his head subconsciously, but he saw that his little master's eyes had moved from Beihai on the screen of the cabin to the window. The battle at the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School suddenly became fierce. With the death of Gravedust, the Nightmare Army was full of momentum, and its morale rose sharply. And there was an obvious break in the rhythm of the battle of the Holy Disarmament Corps. He disappeared from this world without a sound. Gravedust, a new invincible realm expert cultivated by the sanctuary, was even more miserable than Absolute, who died in Li Tianlan's hands with one punch. He came to East Island with hidden strength and died silently. From beginning to end, he could be said to be a nobody. The helicopter hovered over Jifeng Sword Training School. The rain under the night gradually accelerated. Saint stood in the air and was silent for 2 minutes. Through the cabin, Xianyuan Wuxiang stared at Saint for 2 minutes without blinking. His eyes were a little excited, a little guilty, and a little grateful. Young master. Xing Tian let out a muffled cry. Yes. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded, and then shook his head. He seemed to know that something was wrong with his state. He rubbed his face hard and whispered, Xing Tian, do you know what the biggest sorrow of a doctor is? Xing Tian was stunned. The young master in front of him was different from him. He came here with his own mission, so he could teach sports, be a gatekeeper, be a beggar, be a security guard, or do anything. He had shown his strength tonight, and could be valued by Emperor Dong's palace. If there were no accidents, he would not have a chance to do anything for a long time until he left. And the young master in front of him. His combat capability was not zero, but he was really a doctor. Maybe this doctor was more high-end than Emperor Dong's palace, but a doctor was a doctor. Xianyuan Wuxiang's problem seemed to have involved the meaning of his job. Xing Tian hesitated and did not speak. The biggest sorrow of a doctor is to see his comrades die slowly, but he can do nothing but watch. Xianyuan Wuxiang looked at Saint outside the window with a complicated expression. Many years ago, he pointed at Saint and said, I have a comrade who looks like him. Xing Tian glanced at Saint outside the window and still did not speak. Xianyuan Wuxiang took a deep breath and exhaled. Ask him to come and sit down. Xianyuan Wuxiang said. Prepare a pot of good tea. Now. Xing Tian confirmed once more. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded and said, I am a doctor. You can tell him that even if he does not participate in the underground battle, we will win. And from now on, there will be no more casualties in Emperor Dong's palace. Stillness. In front of Mount Dibing, the battle, which could be said to be the key to breaking the stalemate in everyone's eyes, suddenly stopped. The wind and snow were still, the knife light was still, the blood was still, and the blade was still. Everything seemed to be frozen for a moment. This strange scene even made the chaotic battle on Mount Dibing stop. All the invincible realm experts fixed their eyes on Wang Yue Haiyange and Wang Xiaoyao. The blood-stained Xianggu maintained the downward chopping posture, and the sharp blade was less than 30 centimeters away from Wang Yue Haiyange's head. Wang Yue Haiyange reached out her hand. To be exact, it was a finger. She raised her only left hand, and her slender, pale, and beautiful finger gently tapped the blade. Then everything suddenly stopped. Heaven and earth seemed to become extremely quiet at this moment. Jiang Shangyu frowned tightly. Through the distance, she silently looked at the knife in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. An indescribable feeling naturally rose in her heart. He saw Wang Yuexian open her hands. Her 5 fingers pinched the blade in an extremely tough yet delicate manner. Not only was Wang Xiaoyao's blade unable to move an inch, but the entire world seemed to have been completely frozen. Marade's face was a little pale. He thought of the fight with the master of Samsara Palace in Snow Country. As Jiang Shangyu's true confidant, after Mormon's Sword of Eternity ended, Morade naturally confirmed that it was Wang Yue Haiyange who had fought with him. At that time, Wang Yue Haiyange was clearly not his opponent. But now he gritted his teeth fiercely. In his sight, Wang Yue Haiyange stretched out her fist. Her clenched fist was delicate and small, but extremely domineering. It was obviously a body of flesh and blood, but the fist hit the blade hard, and then everything froze there. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyut Sangchuan looked at each other. These 2 brothers, who were competitors and had deep personal grudges against each other, yet were always able to maintain a tacit understanding at crucial moments, looked at each other. In their line of sight, Moongazing Cord's finger lightly tapped the edge of the blade. And then the world seemed to completely freeze. Wang Xiaoyao did not move. He maintained the downward chopping motion, stiff there. In his sight, Wang Yue Haiyange stood up and took a small step back. It was just a small step, but the surrounding environment suddenly changed. Wang Xiaoyao found that he could no longer lock onto Wang Yue Haiyange's figure. An invisible resistance firmly blocked the blade in his hand. There was no way for his knife to move down even 1 centimeter. Chaos, distortion, different perspectives, different pictures, but the same result. In the air above Mount Dibing, Li Tianlan, who had been ready to attack with all his strength, stopped and looked at Wang Xiaoyao and flaming fire in the distance. The sword intent in his eyes flowed, and the 13th flight shook gently. Perhaps the picture in his eyes was the clearest and most realistic. The most realistic picture was that flaming fire did not move. She did not stretch out her fingers, clench her fists, or get up. She just slowly got up and moved a step to the left, shaking. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Wang Yue Haiyange kept breathing deeply, and an extremely horrible aura surged wildly in her body. Her eyes were blood red in an instant. She was the strongest supermaster of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai's right-hand woman, and the master of Samsara Palace. She was now the Dark Queen of the Dark Knights. Even if she was injured, she was still a big shot standing at the top of the Dark World. She had come here for the sake of their past friendship and for the future. She had come here to help, not to be a burden. Wang Yue Haiyange did not mind that one of her arms was cut off. What she could not accept most was that she was used as a bargaining chip to threaten Li Tianlan. If such a thing happened, she might as well not come. She came to help. During the brief confrontation between Wang Xiaoyao and Li Tianlan, this was the only thought in Wang Yue Haiyange's mind. Just like how Li Tianlan could enter Jiang Shangyu's shadow without knowing why. Wang Yue Haiyange herself could not tell what state she was in now. The only thing she could do was to overdraft her potential and body at all costs in that instant. This kind of extreme overdraft was a step further than an all-out explosion. It was almost as if she was burning herself without caring about the consequences, so that her scarred body could withstand the power of her peak or even surpass it. She did not expect that when she completely overdrew herself, it would form such a situation. It felt like space was divided into countless mirrors, and every subtle movement of hers was reflected by pieces of mirror-like space with extensibility. Space was torn apart little by little, and countless spaces were like countless mirrors. In the wind and snow, under the blade, Wang Yue Haiyange felt like she was standing in a room full of mirrors. Her movement of getting up continued to extend in the mirror, turning into a gesture of reaching out and clenching a fist. The movement of raising her hand turned into an outstretched finger. She stood up, but in the mirror, she moved to the left and right. All this was vague and unreal in Wang Yue Haiyange's perception. For a short moment, she could not figure out whether space was distorted and divided or her spirit was distorted and divided. The erupting sword energy kept rushing out of her body. Everything around her was completely distorted. The most illusory was distorted into reality, and the most real her was distorted into an illusion. She was here, but what everyone saw in their consciousness was all an illusion. The whole process was very simple in Wang Yue Haiyange's eyes. The moment Wang Xiaoyao's blade came down, he suddenly paused. At that time, he seemed to have seen something. Song of the Full Moon used that moment to dodge the blade and stand up. Space was distorted and divided. Many things happened in that moment, but in fact nothing happened. It was just a simple dodge. The pale Wangyue Haiyan stood up straight. Her aura was getting stronger and stronger. Overdrawing her body to the limit would make her injuries worse, but at this time, it also gave her power beyond her peak. It was a completely unintentional transformation. The outburst in the desperate situation greatly increased the burden on her body, but the twisted sword intent split the space. In a short period of time, it affected everyone in a way that seemed both coincidental and inevitable that they could not come into contact with. Wangyue Haiyan dodged the blade and stood up. Her body began to recover. Or she was overdrawing. She kept overdrawing. The sword energy was surging in her body, like a mighty torrent. At this moment, Flaming Fire's swordsmanship was real, but she temporarily stood at the peak of the invincible realm. The will that was absolutely concentrated in essence, chi, and spirit was not so much supporting her body. It was better to say that Wangyue Haiyan deceived her body and every organ in her body. She overdrew her body so that every organ, every joint, every drop of blood, and every cell in her body thought that she was in her peak state. So her body was overdrawn, and her sword energy recovered. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. She confused the enemy in the shortest time. She also deceived herself in the shortest time. Only her spirit was still calm and rational. It was hard for Wangyue Haiyan to explain and figure out everything for the time being. If she used the most authoritative words to explain it, it was deception. For Xianyuan Wushang, it was very important. For Wangyue Haiyan, she just didn't want to be a burden. Your opponent. The endless surging aura broke through the wind and snow and rushed to the sky. Wangyue Haiyan's cold voice rang out. It's me. The recovering sword energy broke through to a new peak at an incredible speed in an instant. Frozen, disordered, and still, everything returned to normal in an instant. The blade of Qinggu, the famous saber, trembled slightly, and the downward slash turned into a horizontal sweep. The moment he locked onto Wangyue Haiyan's position again, Wang Xiaorao didn't hesitate and used all his strength to break out completely. He didn't figure out what had just happened, but he didn't like any variables. He hadn't been at the peak of the invincible realm for a long time, less than half a year. This was originally his biggest trump card, and it directly crushed Wangyue Haiyan at the beginning of the battle. If it hadn't been for the accident just now, the final battle in Beihai might have been over by now, and Li Tianlan would have died. A battle at this level needed an opportunity. The so-called victory or defeat, or even life and death, was often decided in an instant. Li Tianlan wanted to save Wangyue Haiyan, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Wang Xiaorao. These three people could almost represent the top combat strength in the dark world today. They were very likely to be able to injure or even kill Li Tianlan in an instant. This shouldn't have been an accident. But the accident happened just like that. Wangyue Haiyan actually struggled to find a way out in a desperate situation. He wasn't very upset or frustrated, but at this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's killing intent really reached an unprecedented peak. He wanted to do something for Beihai, and this was the closest he had ever been to success. Wangyue Haiyan couldn't stop him, and no one could stop him. He was the only one who could make Beihai better. The dazzling broadsword light suddenly drew a natural arc. Wang Xiaoyao's figure shuttled quickly. With just a slight flash, he and the broadsword light had arrived in front of Wangyue Haiyan at the same time. The dazzling brilliance flashed. Wangyue Haiyan, who only had his left hand left, but his aura was stronger than before. He held Cicada Cry and stabbed forward. A stream of sword energy with endless sharpness suddenly collided with the broadsword light. There was no crushing and suppression. It was a completely evenly matched scene. The crazy friction between the sword light and the broadsword light brought about a loud noise that almost tore the space apart. The two figures quickly drew closer. No one retreated. They pulled out their broadswords and pulled out their swords. The fierce collision of the broadsword and the sword sounded in an instant. The changes of the 24 moves of sword in Wangyue Haiyan seemed to have reached the extreme. In the sky and on the ground, the sword light flew. The vast and endless sword energy condensed into beams of light one after another, constantly flashing in the air. However, Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes had become completely gloomy and indifferent, suddenly calmed down a lot. His figure was attacking. Attack, attack, attack. The two of them maintained the shortest distance between each other. The sword and the sword collided countless times. The huge blade in Wang Xiaoyao's hand was like a delicate dagger at this time, sticking close to Wang Yue and him's as he waved them around. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao didn't have any extra movements. The originally extremely violent and arrogant broadsword technique suddenly went to another extreme. His movements became extremely concise, and the absolute conciseness brought about incredible smoothness. Close to Wang Yue Haiyange, his attacks were like a storm. Although he couldn't completely crush Wang Yue Haiyange, as time went by, Wang Xiaoyao once again mastered the attack rhythm. On Mount Dibbing, Wang Shengxiao's tense body slightly relaxed for a moment. He frowned and said, "What just happened?" Li Tianlan shook his head silently. In the situation just now, except for Wang Yue Haiyange, perhaps only Li Tianlan could see clearly what was going on. He could clearly see every movement of Wang Yue Haiyange, and also the mirror-like space around Wang Yue Haiyange. His perception seemed to be focused on the mirror around Wang Yue Haiyange for a few seconds, but his eyes could clearly see the most real state of Wang Yue Haiyange. He didn't know what was going on either. It was as if everyone's perception had been deceived in that instant, but it wasn't the kind of hypnotic power that came from the mind. It was more like an interesting use of power. Fire flaming has broken through? Wang Shengxiao looked at Wang Yue Haiyange and asked strangely. "It's temporary." Li Tianlan said lightly. "It's still a little bit away from a real breakthrough, a little bit." The battle in his sight was still going on. Wang Xiaoyao's movements became more and more concise and smooth. In the shining light, he strode forward, ignoring everything. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he shook his head subconsciously. Flaming fire now temporarily had the strength of the peak of the invincible realm, but it didn't mean that she could beat Wang Xiaoyao. The 24 moves of sword was the supreme sword technique of the Dark World, as famous as the Sword of 6 Paths of Reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In terms of inheritance, the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly better than Wang Xiaoyao, who followed the path of the predecessors and finally perfected his martial arts bit by bit. But Flaming Fire's most fatal flaw at this time was her injury. The injury that she had suppressed before she came here slightly affected her state. As for the external injury, after losing the right arm that she was most used to using the sword, Wang Yue Haiyange's movements were always very strange. Compared to usual, her movements were a little more complicated. Wang Xiaoyao's martial arts were flawed. At the very least, Li Tianlan could see the occasional flaw in Wang Xiaoyao's simple, smooth, and almost perfect movements. Such a flaw could be tested when Song of the Full Moon entered the peak of the invincible realm, and was in good condition. But now Wang Yue Haiyange might be able to see it. But her movement speed couldn't keep up with her eyesight. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and then sighed softly. He didn't expect that the situation would become so passive. Qiushui, Tongtian, Kanglin, Empress, and Lapis Lazuli. The situation in these cities was not unexpected. The power of the joint forces was too strong. In the early stage of the final battle in Beihai, Beihai was destined to be at a huge disadvantage. Throughout the night, the biggest surprise was the moment when the weapons in Mount Dibbing were blocked. Wang Xiaoyao didn't expect that Wu Qinggu would betray Mount Dibbing. No one could expect it. When the weapons in Mount Dibbing couldn't be used, they lost their biggest trump card. Mount Dibbing, which had no high-end combat power, was a toothless tiger. When all kinds of weapons were blocked, it became a sick cat in an instant. Wang Shengxiao put his hope on the weapon system in Mount Dibbing, and Li Tianlan's own powerful combat power. Now that the former trump card had lost its effect, it meant that Li Tianlan had to bear more pressure. This was the first variable. Wang Xiaoyao's hidden strength was the second variable. The destructive power of a peak of the invincible realm expert couldn't be described too much, especially when they lost the advantage of firepower. Their top combat power was at an absolute disadvantage, and almost all the pressure was on Li Tianlan. He was not afraid of Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, or Wang Xiaoyao. He was not afraid of anyone. But when everyone stood on the opposite side of him, so what? Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The sword formation of the 13-story building, which had been rotating around him, suddenly became clear. All eyes were focused on him at the same time, including Wang Xiaoyao's will. Everyone could regard Wang Yuehaian as the key to breaking the situation. But now the main reason for the deadlock was Li Tianlan. Nothing was more important than Li Tianlan's every move now. If I leave Mount Dibing now, what do you think will happen? Li Tianlan looked at the sword formation rotating around him, and suddenly asked. Wang Xiaoyao was stunned. He said calmly, Beihai will lose in the final battle, East Island will take half of Beihai. I will die here, second uncle will become the new patriarch, and Wang Yuehaian will also die. Emperor Dong's palace will turn against the Dark Knights, and there will be a deadly feud between them and the joint forces. Your power in East Island may be withdrawn, but without the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will lose a natural barrier, and the whole dark world will be your enemy. At the same time, you will be pressured by Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State will also find that they have other choices besides Emperor Dong's palace, such as Jiang Shangyu, who is relatively easier to control, and second uncle. It sounds really miserable. Li Tianlan smiled. Let's not talk about this. Wang Shengxiao looked at Li Tianlan. Now that you are standing here, do you think Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu are really willing to let you go with such a good opportunity? The Emperor Dong's palace is in a good situation now. The Flourishing Age Fund's participation has made the Emperor Dong's palace a superforce. If you die here, not only will they lose a fatal threat in the future, but they will also be able to carve up the huge profits in the Emperor Dong's palace. With you here, who would be willing to let you leave? I can't leave, Li Tianlan said calmly. It's not that I can't leave. You don't seem to be optimistic about the result of the final battle. Wang Shengxiao narrowed his eyes and said slowly. To be exact, it's my distrust of you. I know what you are waiting for, and you know what I am worried about. This is your Mount Dibing, and I can do my best. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and continued, Where is Wuyo? Wang Shengxiao suddenly fell silent. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the sword formation rotating around him without saying a word. He is not in Mount Dibing now. At this point, I don't need to lie to you. If you lose this final battle, you will be miserable, but Beihai will be more miserable. If he is here, I can't hide to deal with you. Compared with you, these people in front of you are the real enemies that can't coexist. Where is Wuyo? Li Tianlan asked again. I only know that he is in Beihai. Wang Shengxiao said calmly. Uncle Lin told me that Wuyo can't leave Mount Dibing and Worry-Free Villa. Li Tianlan frowned. I don't know about Wuyo, but he can leave temporarily. Because of some special circumstances, he has to leave. Wang Shengxiao looked at the sword formation around Li Tianlan and said calmly, Because of you, or Wuqing, he feels threatened. So, Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. So before Wuqing's energy is reduced to a certain level, I don't know where he is. Wang Shengxiao said. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at Wang Shengxiao quietly. Wang Shengxiao was also looking at him. There was no avoidance in his eyes at all. Li Tianlan didn't know whether what he said was true or not. But the current situation was really not optimistic. Li Tianlan had to do something. The 13th floor became clearer and clearer around him. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he nodded. In that case, he pointed his finger gently. The infinite sword light drowned the Tianguang sword in an instant. The shining sword light lit up on Mount Dibing, where the wind and snow were flying. In the endless light and shadow, Li Tianlan's voice was calm and indifferent. Then let's do as it wishes and as you wish. Wuqing's energy was slowly but steadily decreasing. Another Li Tianlan appeared on Mount Dibing. It was the Li Tianlan who was materialized by the Tianguang sword carrying Li Tianlan's sword intent. The two identical figures seemed to look at each other for a moment. Tianguang turned around and rushed to Jinghong in the war. It was at this moment. East Island Ninghu. Xing Tian's huge and thick fingers loosened the bowstring that was as dark as night. At the same time, Li Tianlan looked up. It rained in East Island and snowed in Beihai. The night was still dark. Li Tianlan looked up at the night sky. Without his control, the sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly started to spin wildly. Crack! Crack! Countless famous swords around Li Tianlan's body instantly combined into Wuqing. Wuxia turned into a black cloak and draped over Li Tianlan. The cloak fluttered unscrupulously in the cold wind and snow. Countless complex and mysterious golden lines flashed with a faint golden light at the same time. The cloak took Li Tianlan's figure to the sky quickly, getting higher and higher. In a flash, he had become a small black dot. Li Tianlan did not react at all from beginning to end. He just raised his head and looked at the pitch-black sky. The night was dead silent. There were no stars or clouds. There was only wind and snow. Li Tianlan's eyes were solemn and blank. He was now the strongest swordsman standing at the peak of the dark world. In the field of sword, when Wang Tianzong did not show up, he was the strongest. But at this moment, he stood high in the sky and looked at the night sky above with a blank face. Vaguely, he seemed to have sensed an incredibly subtle yet absolutely vast aura. That feeling, it seemed, could be, maybe, probably, it was a streak of sword energy? This volume is about to end. After it ends, there should be a separate chapter to talk about why this volume is so stupid. Well, about this fat man and Xing Tian. Chapter 10:16. Li Tianlan was rising, and Tianguang's sword was falling. Except for Li Tianlan and Wuxia, it seemed that no one or anything could feel that incomparably faint aura. It was far away. That aura was so indifferent, as if separated by an unimaginable distance. It appeared and disappeared in a flash. With Li Tianlan's current strength, he was not even sure if it was a sword energy. Li Tianlan, condensed by Tianguang's sword, had rushed into the Battle of Mount Dibbing at the moment when his real body rose. The surging power from all directions tore the surrounding space wildly. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi's figures were intertwined. The light of the sword and the saber reflected each other, and the sharp killing intent immediately shrouded Tianguang's sword. Everything on the battlefield seemed to be very normal. Just when Wang Xiaoyao was attracted by Li Tianlan, Mochizuki Song, who gradually fell into a passive position, suddenly broke out with all her strength. She did have the strength of the peak of the invincible realm now, but it was undeniable that because of her injury, she was no longer a match for Wang Xiaoyao. She didn't want to be a burden, let alone a bargaining chip in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. She had to seize all the opportunities that she could or could only seize. The cicada's cry trembled violently, and the sword light that was about to be suppressed by the saber light completely lit up. Mochizuki Song, who only had one arm left, strode forward and directly rushed to Wang Xiaoyao. The ninth blade dusk. The solid sword energy tore the surrounding saber light, and Mochizuki Song's figure became more determined than ever. The cicada sword kept buzzing. The moment the saber light was suppressed for a short time, Mochizuki Song's sword intent suddenly changed. The 11th blade alluring. Alluring a city with one sword. All the saber light between heaven and earth shrank in an instant, and condensed on the tip of the cicada's sword. Mochizuki Sword Song seemed to be driven by the cicada's sword. Like a phantom, he appeared beside Wang Xiaoyao in an instant. Clang! Wang Xiaoyao suddenly came to his senses and subconsciously raised the blade in his hand. The tip of the sword, which was shining with the cicada's cry, collided with the huge blade. Mochizuki Song's palm turned slightly, and the long sword with infinite sword energy stabbed forward for a moment, directly cutting a deep wound on Wang Xiaoyao's face. Not far away, Mount Dibbing was completely boiling. Wang Xiaoyao's pupils contracted, and his essence, qi, and spirit were completely condensed. Very annoying. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly said. You are very annoying, so I can only send you to hell first. None. The dark night suddenly shook. A clear shattering sound rang out without warning. Wang Xiaoyao, whose body was tense, waved the blade without any hesitation. Everything around him was shattering. That was a true shattering. The huge blade drew a flawless circle in the night, and the space within 100 meters turned into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The snow and wind evaporated. The night sky was completely shattered. Absolute darkness and silence enveloped Mochizuki Song in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao's body directly retreated a distance of hundreds of meters under the drive of this knife, just standing on the edge of the broken space. His entire body was glowing, and the saber radiance condensed from the immense power became unprecedentedly dazzling. Behind the horizon was the bright moon. Without any hesitation, Wang Xiaoyao stood at the edge of the shattered space and abruptly threw Qiangu out. In the pure darkness, the constantly blossoming saber light suddenly turned into an incomparably pure golden color. Countless golden rays of light refracted in the silent and broken domain. The huge blade of Qiangu flew out of his hand. Every time the blade rotated in the air, it brought a large piece of golden saber radiance. The refracted saber radiance turned into wisps of light, which twisted and turned into pieces of saber shadows. Densely packed. Almost in the blink of an eye, countless golden rays turned into thousands of saber blades. The saber blades rotated and rushed to Mochizuki-san one by one. At the moment when Mochizuki-san, whose body was in the shattered space, stabilized, the saber shadows all over the sky had already arrived in front of her. Mochizuki-san's figure began to rotate rapidly. The eighth blade, burning sky. The sword energy was like fire. A halo of sword energy of nearly 20 meters suddenly appeared around Mochizuki-san. Her body rotated faster and faster, and the scope of the halo of sword energy became larger and larger. The dense sword energy intertwined layer by layer. The huge halo collided with the golden saber shadows all over the sky. The halo spread. The countless saber shadows turned solid the moment they came into contact with the halo. A large number of saber shadows were swept away. Wang Xiaoyao stood there motionless. His body became the center of the saber shadows all over the sky. The saber shadows that were swept away spun back to him, and then rushed to the halo again. The golden saber radiance lit up the whole night sky. Wang Xiaoyao's figure stood in the center of the golden light, incomparably gorgeous and majestic. The halo around Mochizuki-san was getting larger and larger, and the golden saber shadows were getting more and more fast. The vast and endless golden saber seemed to cover the whole night sky, constantly wearing down the sword energy around Mochizuki-san. The scope of the sword energy was getting larger and larger, but the degree of condensation of the sword energy was constantly decreasing. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm with no expression. The huge Qiangu whistled back to his hand. Wang Xiaoyao held the blade and he didn't want to waste any time. He suddenly swung his palm. The golden saber shadows that covered the whole world became completely frenzied. The saber lights all over the sky rushed to Mochizuki-san like crazy. They were swept away, and then they rushed back at a faster speed. Mochizuki-san's rotating figure became more and more strenuous, and the halo of sword energy around her began to dim. He lost. The result was obvious. She cheated her body so that she temporarily had the power of the peak of the invincible realm. She didn't want to be a burden. But even so, she still lost. Mochizuki-san's aura began to decline. The golden saber lights all over the sky in front of her were like a torrent, vast and mighty, occupying all her vision. Mochizuki-san, who had been calm, took a deep breath. Her voice suddenly sounded in the light of the entanglement of the saber and the sword. "I can lose," she said blandly. But her body stopped spinning. The halo of sword energy around her began to be squeezed by countless saber shadows in an instant. The halo became smaller and thinner. Mochizuki-san looked as usual. She held Cicada Cry with her remaining arm, and put it upright in front of her. She raised the sword to her eyebrows. Mochizuki-san's aura suddenly became very calm. It was like the calm before the storm. Her voice slowly sounded, "You can't win either." The boundless golden saber shadows completely drowned her. Mochizuki-san closed her eyes. Her expression became soft and serene, with a little nostalgia. The scenes of the past kept flashing in her mind. Her aura suddenly began to change. It was as if Wang Yuxian-song had suddenly become another person. 24 Moves of Sword 15th Blade Samsara. Chapter 10:17. As the only inheritance of the Li family's swordsmanship, in the Dark World, the 24 Moves of Sword had always been regarded as the top unique skill of swordsmanship in the Dark World, keeping pace with the Sword of Six Paths of Reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In the past hundreds of years, because of the Li family's responsibilities, generation after generation of war gods of the Li family stood on the cusp of the Dark World. Compared with the calm and invincible Wang family of Beihai, the Li family was more powerful. Therefore, the 24 Moves of Sword was even more famous than the Sword of Six Paths of Reincarnation. The dark world was so familiar with the 24 moves of sword. After so many years, almost anyone with a little bit of knowledge could recognize the 24 moves of sword and the 24 unique skills. A few of them had even been lost to the outside world and supported many large-scale forces. However, in the hundreds of years since the Lin clan came to the Li family, very few people could really appreciate the 24 moves of sword. The map of God of War represented the Li family's martial arts for hundreds of years. They were the Balance Manual, the Peak Manual, and the Invincible Manual. The first two were relatively stable, while the latter was almost a new transformation of the Balance Manual and the Peak Manual. Li Honghe practiced the Balance Manual. Even someone as arrogant as Li Guangtu had only practiced the Pinnacle Scripture at the beginning. His Longevity Seal and Immortal Seal still had a lot of traces of the Pinnacle Scripture. After breaking and building, although he had also come into contact with the Invincible Scripture, the Pinnacle Scripture was his foundation. The Li family had 9 generations of war gods. Including Li Tianlan, it was the 10th generation. Among the 10 generations, only Li Tianlan practiced the Invincible Manual. He destroyed his body in the most extreme way, infinitely overdrew his body's potential, and took the fastest way to ensure the strongest strength. Whether it was Dongcheng Huangtu in the memory or Li Tianlan now, their paths had not changed. At the most difficult time, they both chose the Invincible Manual. So for now, in the past hundreds of years, excluding the ancestors of the Lin clan, only Li Tianlan could really let people see the full appearance of the 24 moves of sword, and only he could let people see the strongest state of the 24 moves of sword. Dongqing Huangtu gave the Invincible Manual to Gu Xianyan, and Gu Xianyan taught the Invincible Manual to Flaming Fire in this era. Both of them had some martial arts foundation, so the Invincible Manual they practiced was undoubtedly not very pure. But with the foundation of the Invincible Manual, even if it was not pure, their 24 moves of sword was still the 24 moves of sword of Invincible Manual. What was the most powerful 24 moves of sword? It was to use the most special move in the 24 moves of swordsmanship, to exert the most abundant and perfect sword energy. The 24 moves of sword were not perfect. For example, the Broken Reincarnation, which was claimed to specially restrain the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Eternal Shattering, who possessed sword intent but was unable to completely control sword qi. For example, the extremely sharp sword qi but insufficient sword intent, the Skybreaker. 3 of the 4 absolute swords of the Li clan's 24 moves of sword were incomplete. Only one move, be it the sword qi or the sword intent, could be said to be perfect and flawless. It was the true ultimate sword. 21st Blade, Shatter of Land. This was the only move of the 4 supreme swords that was completely perfect. It was also the ultimate sword that could only be unleashed by practicing the Invincible Manual. The 15th Blade, Samsara, was the most special move in the 24 moves of sword. In the 24 moves of sword, the other 23 moves were mainly for killing. Their sword intent and sword qi could be ever-changing, but their core concept remained the same. They were all focused on killing. Only the 15th Blade had the core idea of borrowing, or a kind of replication in martial arts. This was the most demanding move in the 24 moves of sword. It required the perfect integration of sword energy and willpower to replicate a move that could not be exerted in one's extreme state. It was beyond the peak. One sword reincarnation, extreme sublimation. In Li Tianlan's understanding, it was to use this move to reincarnate an extremely illusory dreamland, temporarily turning everything including oneself into nothingness. In the short moment of reincarnation, the person who chose to be reincarnated was the only real one. The moment the reincarnation sword was drawn, the most real sword energy appeared from the most nothingness. This was also an important basis for supporting Li Tianlan's flawless swordsmanship. After reincarnation, Shatter of Land. This was the strongest 24 moves of sword at present. Mochizuki-song and Li Tianlan did not have much contact, and she did not need to reincarnate Li Tianlan's sword intent. So when the golden saber shadows completely submerged her body, Mochizuki-song's figure suddenly turned into nothingness. An extremely quiet and deadly aura suddenly surged out from the golden saber shadows all over the sky. It was like a dream, real and fake. Flaming Fire's figure disappeared, But the constantly fluctuating aura became stronger and stronger. In a flash, it had become a hidden sword energy. The space was broken and reorganized. A figure appeared in everyone's sight. In the golden light and shadows all over the sky, the bloated figure, which seemed real and illusory, stood quietly, dressed in black and motionless. No one could see her face. Countless golden saber shadows spun wildly around her body and chopped. She was so quiet, from the inside to the outside, there was nothing but silence. Wang Xiaoyao's heart suddenly sank. He did not know the specific reason, but a very violent and obvious uneasiness suddenly rose from his heart. Turning the blade of Millennium Blade, Wang Xiaoyao did not hesitate to open his hands. Thousands of dense golden saber shadows began to retreat at the same time. Countless saber shadows were neatly arranged, turning into a dazzling light curtain. The light curtain gathered toward Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao's hands were put together. He held Millennium Blade in his hand. A purer golden light burst out from the blade of Millennium Blade and continued to extend in the night. In an instant, a huge and heavy golden saber shadow began to take shape in his hand. The golden saber shadows all over the sky kept flying and gathered in his hand. The shadow of the golden giant saber in his hand expanded wildly, and in the blink of an eye, it had expanded to hundreds of meters. Straightforward, decisive and ruthless. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm, and the golden giant saber, which was hundreds of meters long, slashed at Mochizuki and Song without any reservation. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao really did his best, without any reservation. His strongest martial arts was the saber, and his strongest unique skill was also the saber. Tianya Bright Moon. These two unique skills could be said to be the essence of his life's research. After successfully entering the peak of the invincible realm half a year ago, Wang Xiaoyao thought about it day and night, and finally combined these two unique skills and became his strongest trump card. Wang Xiaoyao named this move Saber. Pure Saber. Xiaochen pushed his strength to the limit. Every strand of saber light was the peak of his strength in his life. In an instant, the whole night seemed to be receding. The golden saber shadow, which was hundreds of meters long, occupied everything and became the most dazzling color in the two battlefields on the mountain. And at the foot of the mountain, blood gushed out of Wang Xiaoyao's mouth. His face suddenly became as pale as a sheet of paper as he swung his saber. A large amount of blood gushed out of almost all parts of his body, and it looked extremely tragic. This was almost a move beyond his control. This was the price of extreme overdraft of his body. Before the saber light hurt anyone, his internal organs had been seriously injured by the power he exerted. The golden saber, which was hundreds of meters long, shone in the air and chopped down. The chaotic night sky was split into two halves visible to the naked eye. In the boundless silence and chaos, Mochizuki and Song raised her head. Her eyes were numb and gray. She was indeed no match for Wang Xiaorao. Judging from Wang Xiaoyao's real strength, Mochizuki and Song believed that even if she really broke through to the peak of the invincible realm, her chance of winning against him was less than 40%. At the age of 38, he was at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao's talent was indeed not much worse than Wang Tianzong's. She couldn't block that move of the bright moon, nor could she block the current move of the saber. If she couldn't block it, she couldn't block it. There was nothing to hide from the truth. But what could she do? She couldn't block this move. Wang Xiaoyao would certainly not be able to block her next move. She could also let that damn man see that more than 2 years ago, there was also a person in Mormons. Just like her today, he opened up the prosperous dynasty that belonged to him with one sword move. Mochizuki and Song closed their eyes. The sword energy became more and more illusory. In a trance, in everyone's sight, the bloated figure in the black cloak began to fall from the sky without warning. The blade was on the ground. Her body continued to fall, and her speed became faster and faster. The surging sword chi followed her as she fell, drawing a clear mark in the night. The saber light suppressed the clear sword intent and chopped straight down. Under the night, the figure of flaming fire seemed to have completely become another person in everyone's sight. Master of Samsara Palace. Yagyu Kurasumi suddenly shouted. The moment he spoke, there was a pause in the battle of Mount Dibbing, whether it was graceful bird or heavenly light. Li Tianlan stood high in the sky. The incomparably vast sword energy had disappeared. He lowered his head and looked at the falling figure. His eyes were a little dazed. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace suddenly became real in the process of falling. She held Cicada Cry's left hand and raised it. Above the sky, there was a lot of colors. Night, flying snow, golden saber. A colorful light suddenly appeared on the brightly colored battlefield. Every ray of light was extremely clear and dazzling. The light was like a sword, rushing to the falling golden saber in the air. Mochizuki and Song closed her eyes, and her expression was extremely calm. The extremely powerful aura continued to rise in her body like the last radiance of the setting sun. Once again, it surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and rose all the way. One sword of samsara, extreme sublimation. Before anyone could react, the aura of Mochizuki and Song suddenly approached the peak of the invincible realm. After samsara, it was the shattering of land. Mochizuki and Song were not familiar with Li Tianlan, but she had been with Qin Weibai for many years. So in this sword move, she reincarnated the state of the master of Samsara Palace. The strongest state of the master of Samsara Palace. In most people's minds, everyone knew when the master of Samsara Palace, who had died in Mormons more than 2 years ago, was at her strongest. That was before she died. The light of the eternal sword was too dazzling. So at this time in the dark world, except for Wang Tianzong, probably no one knew that the power that the master of Samsara Palace used to control Ruthless and let him break out with all his strength was the shattering of land after Samsara. The 15th blade Samsara. At this moment, the master of Samsara Palace more than 2 years ago was the only choice of Mochizuki and Song. She could not completely copy the original eternal sword. She was not strong enough, and neither was her weapon. She could copy it. It was just the starting move of the eternal sword. But it was enough to deal with Wang Xiaorao. Mochizuki and Song held Cicada Cry tightly in her hand. The sword energy was still surging and slowly changing. The golden saber that kept chopping down in the air became more and more violent. The golden saber light smashed wisps of 5-colored sword energy one after another. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were completely red. High in the sky, Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly. His heartbeat began to quicken, and his body gradually tightened. As if feeling his will, the cloak that Ruthless turned into a sword formation again. More than a dozen divine weapons slowly rotated around him. In the other direction of Mount Dibbing, the space in the air was slightly distorted. Silently, Jiang Shangyu walked out of the distorted space and looked at the direction of Wang Xiaoyao seriously and solemnly. As an expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this saber and sword meant. Wang Xiaoyao broke out with all his strength. At this time, Mochizuki and Song almost ignored life and death. Mochizuki and Song could not block this saber. Wang Xiaorao also couldn't block this sword. If the light of the saber and sword completely attacked each other, then this would be a fierce battle with no winner. Wang Xiaorao might be stronger than Mochizuki and Song, but everything was meaningless. This was destined to end in mutual destruction. The sword energy and the saber light rubbed wildly in the air. On the battlefield of Mochizuki and Wang Xiaoyao, the area within 1,000 meters was completely covered by all kinds of light. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. His body stretched out little by little, and his eyes became extremely dignified. He had no friendship with Wang Xiaorao. The two sides were just cooperating. From the beginning to the end, they were temporarily driven by interests. Yes, temporarily. Both sides knew very well what was going on, and they also knew the direction of their relationship after this cooperation. If they won the final battle of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao would become the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Qinglei of Zhongzhou State would also clear all the obstacles before the election and completely establish his position as the crown prince. Wang Xiaoyao and the allied forces were also destined to go their separate ways. East Island would be busy absorbing the territory in the south of Beihai. Jifeng Sword Reigning School and Wuji Palace would also become antagonistic again after there was no outside pressure. Even if they wouldn't fight to the death, because of the distribution of interests, there were bound to be countless frictions. The dark world inside East Island would definitely be constantly turbulent, and there was no possibility of it calming down in the near future. And Moraid would also return to the European continent, completely cutting off the relationship between Knights Templars and the Holy Land, and helping Dalos stabilize its position and compete for the dominance of the Dark World in the European continent. Shadow Throne, Dark Knights, the Holy Land, Rothschild. Wild. It would also be very lively. As for Jiang Shangyu, as a deal with the Jiang family of South America, he would also go to America with Jiang Guochu to help the Jiang family of South America stabilize the throne of the Dark World in America. If the Lin clan had different opinions in the process, Jiang Shangyu would have to fight with Lin Fengting. And the Purgatory of Heaven capital would be busy devouring everything left by Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu was not a good person. On the contrary, he was an extremely overbearing and paranoid person. After devouring Emperor Dong's palace, he would definitely want to take East Island back. At that time, it would also cause frictions. As for Wang Xiaorao, after he became the Patriarch of Beihai, he wouldn't do anything to the Allied forces in the short term. But it didn't mean that he would never do anything to the Allied forces. It would take 2 or 3 years to rectify the internal affairs of Beihai and regain its footing. When Li Huaqing completely retired and Wang Qinglei became the president of Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai would probably be the first to deal with the Allied forces. He wanted to destroy Jiang Shangyu and take back everything that Beihai had lost today. For hundreds of years, Beihai had never been in the habit of being a dog. Naturally, Wang Xiaoyao wouldn't either. If Wang Xiaoyao was lucky enough, with his martial arts talent, he could even break through the limit of the peak of the invincible realm in 5 or 6 years, and become the so-called half-step heavenly son beyond the peak of the invincible realm. At that time, even if Wang Tianzong didn't come out, Beihai would make up for the last shortcoming of the cutting-edge combat capability. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Qinglei's status in the future, the Wang family of Beihai would still be a superclass superpower in the Dark World, at least much more difficult to deal with than it was now. In this way, the situation after winning the final battle was already very obvious. Wang Xiaoyao was destined to part ways with them and go against them. Even the Purgatory of Heaven capital might also become enemies after this cooperation. The 3 parties might be able to live in peace in the short term, because each had its own problems that had to be dealt with. But when these problems were almost dealt with, the dynasty that Jiang Shangyu yearned for might not be able to take shape. Even if it took shape, he would have to face new challenges from Wang Xiaorao and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu liked to see the fighting style of Mungeizer Xuanga and Wang Xiaoyao perishing together. He would not save Wang Xiaoyao, and it was impossible for him to do so. If Wang Xiaoyao died here, it would be a happy ending for everyone. It was not their fault. It was Wang Xiaoyao's fault. This situation was undoubtedly the best. But Jiang Shangyu subconsciously raised his head and glanced at the sky. Li Tianlan's figure flew so high that it had merged with the night. Even Jiang Shangyu did not see Li Tianlan's figure. No one cared about Wang Xiaoyao's life or death. What about Mungeizer Xuanga's life or death? If Li Tianlan made a move, seriously injured Li Tianlan, killed Wang Xiaoyao, killed Mungeizer Xuanga, and killed Wang Shengxiao, would the final battle in Beihai come to an end? Jiang Shangyu believed that Li Tianlan could also see this possibility. But there were many things that could not be avoided just because they could see the ending. He did not save Wang Xiaoyao, but he was ready to make a move with all his strength when Li Tianlan saved Mungeizer Xuanga. The only pity was that he still did not know where Li Guangtu was. The only thing he could be sure of was that Li Guangtu should be nearby now. He had no choice. When Jiang Shangyu made a move, he would definitely cooperate fully. Jiang Shangyu thought silently. A domain had begun to bloom in his palm and was constantly condensing. Li Guangtu was indeed nearby. He did not approach the battlefield of Wang Xiaoyao and Mungeizer Xuanga, nor did he go to Mount Dibing. Instead, he chose to stand under a dense tree in the middle of the battlefield. The wind and snow covered the sky and the earth. He stood quietly, and his body was covered with wind and snow. All his aura was completely restrained. Standing quietly under the tree and observing the situation of Mount Dibing and Wang Xiaoyao, he looked like a snowman. He had been standing here for 2 days. A few hours before the final battle, an elite of the Beihai Internal Security Force patrolling nearby passed by him, and even stuck a branch on his head, which was covered with wind and snow. The branch was still stuck on his head, which looked a little funny. In a state of extreme concealment, he raised his head and silently looked at the golden saber light and the colorful sword energy in the air. His eyes narrowed little by little. Subtle sword energy surged out of his body little by little, quietly filling every grain of wind and snow on his body. Wang Xiaoyao was the most surprising person tonight. He was also the biggest surprise of the joint forces. When the outcome of the battle between him and Mungazer Xuanga was so important that it could directly affect the outcome of the final battle in Beihai, and even Li Tianlan's life and death, no one could deny Wang Xiaoyao's contribution in this final battle. Li Guangtu raised his head and quietly looked at Wang Xiaorao in the air. He calculated the angle and the distance, silently waiting for the opportunity to make a move. Compared with Jiang Shangyu's hesitation, he was very sure that Li Tianlan would definitely make a move. At that time, the whole battlefield might have some unexpected changes. Through the wind and snow, Li Guangtu's eyes were lonely and indifferent. The main purpose of his coming to Beihai this time was to kill Li Tianlan and get the resources of Emperor Dong's palace. As for allies, Chen Fangqing was an ally. Besides that, he didn't think he had any allies. He teamed up with Jiang Shangyu to get rid of Li Tianlan. That was all. If there was a chance, Wang Xiaoyao, Jiang Shangyu, and everyone else. If he could kill them, Li Guangtu naturally didn't want to let them go. In the silent wind and snow, he took a gentle step forward and looked at the sky more and more attentively. The colorful light rose against the sky. The golden saber light kept condensing and shining, chopping down crazily. Mungazer Xuanga's body accelerated. 100 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. Boom! The sword light flew, and Mungazer Xuanga's slender body finally fell to the ground. The moment his feet touched the ground, Mungazer Xuanga suddenly opened her eyes. Her figure disappeared. The bloated figure in a black robe in everyone's sight also disappeared. Only the sword light was still flying. The meteor rose from the ground in an instant. With a loud bang, the colorful sword energy all over the sky gathered into a bunch. The sharp edge shattered the golden saber light in an instant and appeared in front of Wang Xiaoyao. At this moment, the edge of the sword could no longer be described as swift. It almost ignored the distance. Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes were scarlet, seemed to be completely stimulated. His body didn't dodge. Facing the sword light piercing his heart, he raised Qiangu in his hand and chopped directly at Mungazer Xuanga's head. They perished together. Puff! With a dull sound, the cicada's blade directly pierced Wang Xiaoyao's heart. There was no blood. Countless sword energy frantically flowed back and was directly pressed back into Mungazer Xuanga's body by an irresistible force. The blade of Qiangu froze above Mungazer Xuanga's head. Li Tianlan's figure directly appeared between the two. He reached out and directly pulled Mungazer Xuanga to his side. It was too late to do anything. In an instant, the majestic sword energy and the extremely condensed domain directly broke out from Li Tianlan's side. 30-meter mortal world. For the first time, the most powerful defensive unique skill of the Jiang family of South America left its master. The moment Li Tianlan appeared, Jiang Shangyu's body directly turned into a phantom, 100 meters away, and almost directly narrowed the distance between him and Li Tianlan in half a second. He opened his palm, and the domain that had been brewing for a long time completely enveloped Li Tianlan's body. The extremely condensed domain was compressed crazily, directly imprisoning Li Tianlan's body within a range of more than 10 meters. As the 30-meter mortal world formed around Li Tianlan, a sword light so powerful that it almost shattered heaven and earth suddenly lit up from the ground. The moment Li Tianlan's eyes saw the light, Li Guangtu, who had been hiding silently on the ground, had directly appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The 24 moves of sword break of the sky. Everyone was waiting for this moment. The battle on Mount Dibing completely stopped. The 30-meter mortal world created by Jiang Shangyu instantly turned into absolute darkness. In the darkness, all the attacks that completely existed in Jiang Shangyu's imagination were concretized, pulling Li Tianlan's body crazily and affecting his balance. The black domain outside the 30-meter mortal world began to collapse inward, and the outer domain space became extremely soft. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were calm and indifferent. For today's opportunity, he had waited for decades. He had absolute confidence in his domain. Dongqing Huangtu might ignore everything in his heyday, but now Li Tianlan couldn't break his 30-meter mortal world in a short time. Outside of his domain, he could make his domain undergo different changes. Li Tianlan couldn't break his domain. This also meant that neither Li Guangtu nor anyone else could break his domain. Jiang Shangyu himself couldn't even cancel the domain in a short time. But being unable to cancel it didn't mean that it couldn't be changed. The edge of the domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly turbulent. The deep darkness, like waves of water, became soft, deep, and irregular. Jiang Shangyu attacked crazily. He was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. The mighty power in his hands turned into translucent airwaves one after another. On Mount Dibing, Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and unsheathed his long saber. His body jumped up like a meteor, and a waterfall-like saber light burst out from his hands in an instant. It was endless. Hundreds and thousands of saber lights gathered together and poured down in Tianhai Wuji's hands. All the light rushed in the direction of Li Tianlan. Yagyu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji attacked almost at the same time. Above the night sky, Jifeng raining sword. Mount Dibing was completely illuminated by the sword light in an instant. Gale, flying snow, raging fire, thunder, and endless light and shadow burst out in Yagyu Kurumi's hands and turned into fierce and violent sword energy. The sword energy and the saber light converged and merged perfectly, and then turned into pure power. Li Guangtu appeared at the edge of the domain. The sword light that broke the sky was condensed into a small beam by him. The sword in his hand directly pierced into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Jiang Guoqiu also attacked with all his strength. His domain and Jiang Shangyu's domain merged perfectly. Or it could be said that Jiang Shangyu's domain swallowed Jiang Guoqiu's domain, so that the edge of the 30-meter mortal world, which temporarily trapped Li Tianlan and Mochizuki Xuanga, became softer. Countless blazing white lights like holy light burst out in an instant. Moraid's figure was like a mad bull. He roared and rushed forward, waving his fists. White fist shadows were connected into one, and they completely hit into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. He was originally an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. After being crowned by the Pope, he was even closer to the peak of the invincible realm. He could even be regarded as the weakest expert at the peak of the invincible realm. At this time, when he broke out with all his strength, he was even more terrifying than Yagyu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm on Mount Dibing were also desperately attacking at the same time. The power of nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm gathered together, which was almost far beyond the full outbreak of an ordinary expert of the invincible realm. Countless lights and shadows completely covered the battlefield where Mochizuki Xuanga and Wang Xiaoyao fought. It was dazzling. For a moment, no one could see what was happening around Li Tianlan. Except for Wang Xiaoyao, all the experts of the invincible realm were desperately attacking. The 30-meter mortal world that trapped Li Tianlan was extremely strong. At this time, the constantly fluctuating edge of the domain seemed to have become a container that absorbed everyone's power at this moment. Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guoqiu, and Moraid. Two of them were beyond the peak of the invincible realm. One was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. 3 were invincible realm experts. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm. Without any hesitation or reservation, this was almost all the high-end combat capability of the Dark World. Everyone seized this opportunity, but at the same time, they poured their strongest power on Li Tianlan. People in the world attacked Beihai together. At this moment, it became people in the world killing Li Tianlan together. The incomparably strong 30-meter mortal world carried everyone's power, and was almost completely deformed. The domain let out a cracking sound. Everyone knew that the moment the domain broke, Li Tianlan was besieged by everyone present at the same time. Chosen One? Donghuang? What could they do? Everyone looked at Li Tianlan coldly. Li Tianlan's figure was completely submerged in the black 30-meter mortal world, blurred. Suddenly, there was a light in the deep and obscure darkness. In the domain, Mochizuki-san, whose consciousness had become a little dizzy, managed to take off the black bracelet in her hand. She didn't give it to Li Tianlan. Instead, she directly threw the bracelet into the 13-story building surrounding the two of them. The sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly stopped for a moment. The black bracelet turned into a black sniper rifle. It was not in the form of a sword. But in this state, the Dark Saint spear directly found its own orbit and position in the sword formation of the 13-story building. The spear and the sword rotated around Li Tianlan at the same time. The domain twisted wildly, faster and faster. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and a little cruel. He slowly stretched out his palm. Crack! The rotating sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly emitted endless dazzling light. This was not sword energy. It had nothing to do with the sword or the domain. It was like pure light. Or it was pure energy. The sword formation of the 13-story building disappeared completely. The huge Xianyuan blade appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. At the moment when the domain was about to break, between heaven and earth, Li Tianlan's clear, indifferent, and infinitely majestic voice echoed in the night sky, one word at a time. Where I stand. Xianyuan blade was dazzling, and the colorful light kept flowing. It was pure light. It passed through the absolute darkness without any attack, and directly penetrated the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Li Tianlan's voice sounded with the shuttling of the light. Forbid the domain. Whoosh! The 30-meter mortal world, which was distorted to the extreme, began to rotate in the opposite direction in an instant. Before anyone could react, it became calm and weak. Only Li Tianlan's voice was still echoing, like a god. Where I stand, sword light is forbidden. There was no sound. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world was broken. In the domain, both the saber light and the sword energy disappeared in an instant. The colorful light was mighty and obliterated everything in the blink of an eye. The sword of Xianyuan blade was dim to the extreme. In the last afterglow of the light, Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. Forbid here. Forbid the domain, forbid the sword light. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu's faces changed dramatically in an instant. Without any hesitation, the two of them rose directly into the sky. Li Tianlan's last forbid sounded. The two of them suddenly fell to the ground. The next second, Li Tianlan's figure directly rushed out of the dissipating domain. Mochizuki-sang's body appeared beside Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao felt cold for a moment and subconsciously held her body. Li Tianlan disappeared. Tianguang's sword appeared beside Wang Shengxiao. Tianguang's sword light was completely dim, like a shadow. Shadow. No! An extremely angry roar suddenly sounded from Mount Dibing. Li Tianlan's figure directly changed places with Tianguang's sword in an instant. Puff! In the dull piercing sound, the huge blade of the indestructible Xianyuan blade directly cut open Tianhai Wuji's chest. Blood rained all over the sky. Tianhai Wuji, with a blank look in his eyes, subconsciously wanted to lower his head. But his line of sight suddenly flew up. The head of the first Grandmaster of East Island flew up into the sky with a lot of blood without warning. His chest was broken, his heart was broken, and his head flew up. The so-called Grandmaster, the so-called invincible realm. In an instant, it was like a blade of grass that was directly cut off. No. You. Yagyu Kurumi's sorrowful and indignant roar stopped abruptly. Xianyuan blade in Li Tianlan's hand disappeared in an instant. One after another, the divine weapons suddenly scattered around Mount Dibing and turned into shadows one after another. Li Tianlan took a step out, instantly changed places with the shadow, and appeared in front of Yagyu Kurumi. Yagyu Kurumi opened his mouth, and his roar was directly suppressed. Great power was poured into his arms, and Li Tianlan suddenly exerted force. Yagyu Kurumi's upper body was pressed down. Knee strike. The knee strike of dual wind and thunder veins. Unimaginable power and speed. Extremely violent and extremely simple movement. Bang. In the dull sound, Yagyu Kurumi's upper body suddenly spat out a lot of blood. His chest was suddenly smashed under the violent impact, and a lot of blood rushed into his head. Under the great pressure, countless blood, like bullets or swords, directly pierced Yagyu Kurumi's skull. His whole head was like a watermelon smashed by a sledgehammer, and blood and brain matter suddenly burst out. Instant kill. The second instant kill. In the twinkling of an eye, The two grandmasters of East Island had completely fallen, and they died without a whole body. Li Tianlan's figure flickered. More than a dozen shadows kept moving on Mount Dibbing, and the shadows covered the whole area. Wherever Li Tianlan and the shadows were, everything around was completely his domain. He could appear in any place where the shadows existed, and he could also disappear from any place where the shadows existed. He came and went unpredictably, regardless of the distance. One after another, the domains shrank crazily. Jiang Guoqiu, who was in a violent state of mind, had a face full of horror. He and Moraid gathered together for the first time. The two of them stood side by side, and they desperately wanted to rush out of Mount Dibbing. Boom! The black shadow flickered instantly, and the mighty power tore Jiang Guoqiu's domain from behind in an instant. At the same time, an extremely condensed domain once again enveloped Jiang Guoqiu and Moraid. It was a close call. The great power pulled the two of them directly out of Li Tianlan's attack range. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu appeared in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Li Guangtu squinted, and there was deep fear in his eyes. But Jiang Shangyu's eyes were full of rage, and he almost lost his mind. Li Tianlan. He squeezed out a low roar from his throat, word by word. You have to die. You have to die. Think about how to survive yourself first, Li Tianlan said in a calm voice. Heh. The somewhat unfamiliar and strange chat stopped abruptly when Li Tianlan appeared in front of Mochizuki and Mochizuki. The helicopter hovered in the air. The rain outside the window was getting heavier and heavier. Xing Tian's huge body curled up in the cabin of the helicopter. He lowered his head and remained motionless. Saint and Xianyuan Wushang stared at the picture of Mount Dibbing on the screen at the same time, but their reactions were different. They saw Jiang Shangyu attack with all his strength, and they saw Li Guangtu break out with all his strength. They saw Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guoqiu, and more than a dozen top superiors of the half-step invincible realm working together without hesitation. The dark domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly twisting and rotating, until the light in the domain lit up, and Li Tianlan's voice came out. Saint's solemn face slightly relaxed for a moment. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and laughed. It's the law of sword. Has it come to this step? The law of sword? Hearing the term that he had never heard of, Saint frowned. What's that? It's what you see now. This is the law of sword. In other words, it's probably the limit state of the heavenly sun. Big Brother originally needed to make further breakthroughs before he could use the law of sword. Of course he also needed Wei. Well, and Wu Qing's cooperation. Now he has reached this step. Maybe Big Brother has just found something amazing, Wei. Tut, he shook his head with a headache. Wu Qing's state is also very important. Who the hell are you? Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang and asked slowly. He had been in the cabin for nearly 20 minutes, but Xianyuan Wushang's attitude toward him had been very strange. Some things he said were also inexplicable. For example, the so-called law of sword. Saint had never heard of this before. Now, I'm a doctor of Emperor Dong's palace. Xianyuan Wushang laughed. What about before? Saint asked without relaxing. Before? Xianyuan Wushang was in a trance and suddenly asked. If I tell you that there was no before, would you believe me? Here it comes again, Saint cursed in his heart. This kind of inexplicable conversation had been repeated many times. Hearing it again, he didn't even know what to say. I'm kidding. Xianyuan Wushang gave a hollow laugh. Before you just treated me as a tourist. But if you don't mind, I'd like to be your brother. I have no more or less brothers, but I don't have brothers of unknown origin. Saint's voice was a little cold. Is origin really so important? Xianyuan Wushang said with a smile. What matters is what I've done and what I can do in the future. What can you do? Saint raised his eyebrows slightly. I'm a doctor. First of all, I can definitely save people. For example, the real sister-in-law. Well, you should know that I'm not talking about the one in Tiannan now, but the one in Europe. No, that's not right either. They are a little strange. Strictly speaking, they are not real or fake. They are all real. They are the same person. You. Saint's expression changed instantly. He suddenly stood up and grabbed Xianyuan Wushang's shoulder. Don't get excited. Take your time, take your time. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and pressed Saint's body back to the seat. Another example is that I now control the weapon control authority of the entire East Island. Do you know what that means? Now in Beihai, there is no enemy, not even a bullet. Everything I can control will be given to Emperor Dong's palace as a greeting gift. Tut, a brother like me is so generous. You don't even want to acknowledge it. What are you doing, buddy? Saint's brain suddenly became extremely chaotic. Xianyuan Wushang had already talked about greeting gifts before. But what happened to Qin Weibai shocked him greatly. Qin Weibai couldn't have told him these things, so how did he know? How much do you know about the boss? Saint shook his head hard, looked at Xianyuan Wushang seriously, and said in a deep voice, "Not much at the moment." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. "But I'll go to the European continent to talk to her after this. Since I can tell you, you can trust me. I can cure her. Of course, it takes time, or rather the right time. Even if I want to wake her up now, I won't do it. It's a good thing for everyone that she's in this state for the time being." "You talk to her?" Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang strangely. "The boss is unconscious and in a bad state now. How are you going to talk to her?" "I have my ways." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head slightly and said nothing. Saint was silent for a while. Suddenly he looked at Xing Tian, who was curled up in the corner of the cabin without saying a word. In this situation, Xing Tian was completely different from the fierce man who pulled the bow and shot Gravik to death outside the cabin. Now his huge body was curled up, and he looked like a doormat. Saint shook his head slightly. "What about him? His strength is limited, and so is mine. We can do things that a lot of people can't do, but some things are one-off. For example, he shot your so-called superior of the invincible realm to death, and I controlled the weapon system of East Island. These are all one-off things, and they'll be gone after they're used. At least in Emperor Dong's palace. I hope everyone can treat me as a pure doctor. As for him, I think it's reasonable to arrange him to be a PE teacher." He paused and continued to smile. "Don't worry. I have no hostility toward Emperor Dong's palace. Everything I've done can prove it." He looked at Saint and said softly, "Maybe you should look out of the window." Saint was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly realized that the fighting sound outside the cabin was getting smaller and smaller, almost disappearing. He was shocked, stood up subconsciously, and rushed to the cabin door. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School was at the foot of the mountain. But it was getting quieter and quieter. Saint stood in front of the cabin door, looking at everything below, and kept silent for a long time. In the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School, everyone in the Nightmare Army also kept silent for a long time. Saint blinked and suddenly didn't know what to say. It was still raining outside the cabin. The raindrops fell on the ground. But the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School had completely changed. The soldiers of the Nightmare Army were full of vigor, and there were few enemies who could fight back. Most importantly, as the rain fell, flowers were blooming on the land of Jifeng Sword Training School at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright colors almost occupied the entire headquarters of Jifeng Sword Training School. The rain was dripping in the air. An unimaginably rich life force was brewing between the heavens and the earth. This, Saint turned his head in disbelief and looked at Xianyuan Wushang, who called himself a doctor. "This is. Come and see." Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan on the screen and said gently, "It seems that something interesting is going to appear. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."